Step into the art of Poirot, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot masters the craft of mystery.
In the quaint English village of Broadhinny, where secrets whisper like autumn leaves, a nosy charwoman named Mrs. McGinty is brutally murdered in her cozy parlor, struck down by a poker, her gossiping tongue silenced forever. But why? Was it her prying into hidden affairs, financial scandals, or something far darker, a chain of poisonings linking back to an unsolved 1928 murder in Devon? Enter the brilliant Belgian detective Hercule Poirot with his little grey cells and unyielding logic, unraveling a web of lies among a closed circle of suspects. A detritant doctor and his devoted wife, a retired major hiding marital strife, a glamorous actress with a scandalous past, and a spinster heiress guarding a forged will. As bodies fall and alibis crumble, Poirot exposes not just one killer, but a decades-old conspiracy of greed, love, and betrayal that ties a forgotten poisoning to the present. Will the truth shatter the village's facade? Who among these polite neighbors is the real monster? And can Poirot's genius prevent more deaths before the final, shocking reveal? Dive into this Agatha Christie-style mystery, where every clue matters, and no secret stays buried. Chapter 1. The quiet charms of Broadhinny. The gentle undulations of the English countryside, where the hedgerows bloomed with the quiet persistence of nature's own rhythm, lay the village of Broadhinny. It was one of those places that seemed eternally suspended in a haze of pastoral serenity, where the church spire pierced the sky like a steadfast sentinel, and the thatched cottages huddled together as if whispering secrets to one another. The year was 1952, and the post-war world had begun to mend its wounds. Yet in Broadhinny time moved at a leisurely pace, governed by the tolling of the bells and the seasonal turn of the plough. Captain Arthur Hastings, retired from the rigors of military life and the occasional adventures that had once entangled him with his old friend Hercule Poirot, had taken up residence in this idyllic spot some months earlier. He sought the tranquility that London could no longer provide, a place where he might tend to his roses and indulge in the simple pleasures of village society. Broadhinny, with its population scarcely exceeding 200 souls, appeared the perfect haven. The villagers were a polite lot, bound by the invisible threads of tradition and mutual acquaintance. Yet, as Hastings would soon discover, beneath the veneer of civility simmered the undercurrents of human frailty, envy, resentment, and the occasional spark of malice. Hastings' cottage, a modest affair named Rosebank, stood at the edge of the village green, opposite the ancient and known as the Three Crowns. From his sitting-room window, he could observe the comings and goings of his neighbors with the mild curiosity of a man who had seen enough excitement in his lifetime. On this particular morning in early autumn, the air was crisp with the promise of falling leaves, and a light mist clung to the ground like a reluctant dream. Hastings sipped his tea, perusing the daily newspaper with half-hearted interest, when a familiar figure caught his eye, crossing the green dot. It was Mrs. McGinty, village charwoman, a woman of robust constitution and indefatigable energy. At 60-odd years, she possessed the sort of vitality that belied her age, her stout frame bustling about with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Mrs. McGinty was known throughout Broadhinny for her services as a daily help, scrubbing floors, polishing silver, and tending to the hearths of those who could afford her modest fees. But it was her other talent that truly defined her in the eyes of the villagers, an unparalleled gift for gossip. She collected snippets of information as one might gather wildflowers, weaving them into narratives that entertained and occasionally scandalized her employers. "Ah, Captain Hastings," she would say in her broad West Country accent, her eyes twinkling with mischief as she wielded her duster. "Did you hear about young Miss Rendell and that handsome lodger at Leburn? Proper carry-on, if you ask me. And him with a wife back in London, or so they say." Hastings had employed her twice a week to keep Rosebank in order, and while he found her chatter amusing in small doses, he often steered the conversation towards safer topics such as the weather or the state of the cricket. This morning, however, Mrs. McGinty was not headed to his cottage but towards the grander residence of Kilchester House, the home of Colonel and Mrs. Summerhays. The colonel, a retired officer from the Indian Army, was a bluff, red-faced man, given to reminiscing about his days in the Punjab, while his wife, Evelyn, was a delicate creature, fond of her garden and her afternoon teas. As Hastings watched, Mrs. McGinty paused to exchange words with another villager, Mr. James Bentley, a reclusive young man who lodged at the home of Mrs. Upwood, an elderly widow with a penchant for the dramatic. Bentley was an odd sort, pale and bookish, employed sporadically as a clerk in the nearby town of Culhampton. Rumor had it that he harbored literary ambitions, though his demeanor suggested a soul burdened by unspoken troubles. Mrs. McGinty nodded vigorously during their brief conversation, her laughter carrying across the green like the caw of a distant rook. The village green was a hub of gentle activity that day. Dr. Rendell, the local physician, emerged from his surgery, a modern addition to the old vicarage, and tipped his hat to Miss Honoria Weatherby, the spinster who ran the post office with the precision of a Swiss clock. Miss Weatherby, tall and angular, with spectacles perched on the end of her nose, was the repository of Broadhinny's correspondence. and thus privy to many a confidential matter. Her brother, Major Weatherby, a veteran of the Great War, lived with her and spent his days in quiet pursuits, though his limp and occasional outbursts hinted at deeper scars. Further along, the Reverend and Mrs. Banks strolled arm in arm, the vicar expounding on some theological point while his wife nodded indulgently. They were a kindly pair, devoted to their flock, yet even they were not immune to the village's subtle tensions. Mrs. Banks, it was whispered, had once harbored ambitions beyond the parsonage, ambitions thwarted by marriage and duty. Hastings set down his teacup and decided upon a morning constitutional. The air was invigorating, and he fancied a chat with Colonel Summerhays about the upcoming village fete. As he stepped out, buttoning his tweed jacket against the chill, he encountered Mrs. McGinty returning from her errand. Her face was flushed, not merely from exertion but from some inner excitement. "Good morning, Mrs. McGinty." Hastings greeted her with a polite smile. "Off to Kilchester House already? The Summerhays must be keeping you busy." "Aye, Captain," she replied, her voice a conspiratorial whisper despite the open air. "Busy as bees they are. But, mark my words, there's trouble brewing up there, Mrs. Summerhays. She's got that look about her like a cat what's seen a ghost. And the Colonel, barking orders like he's back in the barracks. Something's amiss. I tell that." Hastings chuckled indulgently. "Come now, Mrs. McGinty, not every raised voice signals calamity. Perhaps it's merely the strain of hosting the fete." She shook her head, her grey curls bobbing under her sensible hat. "Nay, sir, I've cleaned for him these past 5 years, and I know when the polish don't shine right. There's secrets in that house, old ones and new, and that lodger of theirs, Mr. Robin Upwood, Mrs. Upwood's adopted son, ye know he's been poking about where he shouldn't. Wrights plays he does, full of murder and mayhem, unnatural, if ye ask me." Robin Upwood was indeed a figure of interest in Broadhinny. The son of the aforementioned Mrs. Laura Upwood, a formidable woman who had made her fortune in the theatre before retiring to the village. Robin was a playwright of moderate success. His presence added a touch of bohemian flair to the otherwise staid community, though his sharp wit and probing questions often set tongues wagging. Hastings bid Mrs. McGinty good day and continued his walk, pondering her words. Village gossip was the lifeblood of such places, harmless for the most part, yet capable of stirring unrest. He passed the home of the Elliots, a young couple recently arrived from London. Patrick Elliot worked in insurance, a steady if unexciting profession, while his wife Deirdre was a pretty vivacious woman who seemed ill-suited to rural life. They had taken Laburnum's, a charming cottage with a view of the river, and were already integrating into village society, though Deirdre's flirtatious manner had not gone unnoticed. By the time Hastings reached Kilchester House, the mist had lifted, revealing the estate in all its faded glory. The house was a rambling Georgian structure, its facade weathered by time, surrounded by gardens that Evelyn Summerhays tended with loving care. The Colonel himself was in the driveway, inspecting his vintage motorcar, a relic from his Indian days. "Morning, Hastings," boomed the Colonel, his moustache twitching with enthusiasm. "Fine day for a spin. What, care to join me?" Hastings declined politely, citing his preference for walking. They fell into conversation about the fete, the Colonel's plans for a shooting stall, and the general state of the nation. Yet beneath the Colonel's bluster, Hastings detected a note of distraction, as if his mind wandered to less pleasant matters. That as they spoke, Mrs. Summerhays appeared at the door, her face pale and drawn. She was a woman in her late 40s, elegant in a quiet way, with soft brown hair and eyes that held a perpetual sadness. "Arthur," she called softly, "Mrs. McGinty has just left. She mentioned something about ... Well, about old letters. I think she may have found something in the attic." The Colonel waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, my dear, the woman's a busybody. Pay her no mind." But Evelyn's expression suggested otherwise, and Hastings, ever the observer, noted the slight tremor in her voice. The tension was palpable, a subtle rift in the facade of domestic harmony. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully. Hastings lunched at the Three Crowns, where the landlord, Mr. Cobb, regaled him with tales of local history. Cobb was a jovial soul, broad-shouldered and quick with a pint, but even he alluded to Mrs. McGinty. "She's got ears like a fox," he said with a wink. "Here's things others miss. But one day, that'll get her into trouble." Hastings returned home in the afternoon, his mind idly turning over the snippets of conversation. Broadhinny that seemed so peaceful, yet he recalled Poirot's oft-repeated maxim, "It is the quiet ones, mon ami, who hide the deepest secrets." Little did he know that the tranquility was about to shatter, and that his old friend would soon be summoned to unravel the threads of a most perplexing mystery. Chapter 2. The shadow of death descends. The following morning dawned with an uncharacteristic heaviness over Broadhinny, as if the very atmosphere had conspired to weigh upon the spirits of its inhabitants. The mist that had lingered the previous day had thickened into a fog, shrouding the village green in a veil of grey that muffled sounds and blurred outlines. Captain Hastings awoke to the distant tolling of the church bell, its notes somber and insistent, calling the faithful to matins. He rose with his customary discipline, performing his ablutions and dressing in a neat tweed suit before descending to the kitchen, where his housekeeper, Mrs. Larkin, a silent, efficient woman from the neighboring hamlet, had prepared a modest breakfast of porridge and toast. As he ate, Hastings glanced through the window, noting the absence of the usual early risers. The green lay deserted, save for a solitary figure hurrying towards the post office, Miss Weatherby, her angular form cutting through the fog like a ship's prow. There was something urgent in her stride, a departure from her habitual measured pace, and Hastings wondered idly if the post had brought some pressing news. He dismissed the thought, attributing it to the weather's influence on his mood, and turned his attention to the newspaper. The headlines spoke of distant events, political upheavals in Europe, economic recoveries, but nothing that touched the insulated world of Broadhinny. It was not until mid-morning, as Hastings ventured out to purchase tobacco from the village shop, that the first whispers of disturbance reached his ears. The shop, a cramped emporium run by Mr. and Mrs. Carpenter, was abuzz with subdued conversation. Mrs. Carpenter, a plump woman with a florid complexion, leaned over the counter, her voice lowered to a dramatic hush as she addressed a cluster of customers. Found her this morning stiff as a board, poor soul, blood everywhere, they say, and her with not an enemy in the world, or so we thought. Hastings paused in the doorway, his hand on the latch, as the words pierced the air. The group comprising the Reverend Banks, Major Weatherby, and young Deirdre Elliot turned as one, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. "Captain Hastings," exclaimed Mrs. Carpenter, spotting him. "Have you heard it's Mrs. McGinty murdered in her own cottage? Bessie Hill found her when she went to borrow some sugar. Struck down with a blunt instrument, the constable says. Oh, it's dreadful." Hastings felt a chill run down his spine, unrelated to the fog outside. Mrs. McGinty, the indefatigable gossip, silenced forever. It seemed inconceivable, a rupture in the fabric of village life. He stepped forward, his military bearing lending him an air of authority amid the fluttering consternation. "When did this happen?" he inquired, his voice steady though his mind raced. "Last night, sometime after 9, replied Major Weatherby, his limp more pronounced as he shifted his weight. The Major's face was grim, his eyes shadowed by memories of battles long past. "Bessie says the door was ajar, and there was Mrs. McGinty on the floor, her head bashed and no sign of forced entry. Mind you, she must have known her attacker." The Reverend Banks nodded solemnly, his clerical collar seeming tighter than usual. "A tragic loss. Mrs. McGinty was a pillar of our community, always ready with a helping hand. We must pray for her soul and for justice." Deirdre Elliot, her pretty features pale beneath a layer of rouge, clutched her shopping basket tightly. "It's frightening, isn't it, in a place like this where everyone knows everyone who could do such a thing?" Hastings absorbed the details, his thoughts turning inevitably to his old friend Poirot. How the little Belgian would relish this murder in a close circle, where motives lurked behind every polite facade. But Poirot was far away in London, ensconced in his Whitehaven mansions, and Hastings had no intention of summoning him for what might prove a straightforward case of robbery gone awry. The conversation continued in hushed tones as Hastings made his purchase, the villagers speculating on possible culprits. James Bentley, the reclusive lodger, was mentioned his odd manner and recent arguments with Mrs. McGinty over some trivial matter. Then there was Robin Upward, whose theatrical temperament might conceal darker impulses. Even the some were alluded to. Their household tensions no secret thanks to the very woman now deceased. Bidding the group farewell, Hastings made his way towards Mrs. McGinty's cottage, drawn by an inexplicable urge to see the scene for himself. The cottage, a humble thatched dwelling on the village's outskirts, was cordoned off by Constable Pork, a sturdy young officer from Colehampton who had cycled over at first light. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves, but they parted respectfully as Hastings approached. "Captain," greeted Poke, touching his helmet. "Nasty business this. Inspector Spence is on his way from the county town. That says it's murder, plain as day." "Might I have a look?" Hastings asked, his tone casual yet insistent. Years of association with Poirot had imbued him with a certain confidence in such matters. Poke hesitated, then nodded. "Just a peek, sir. Don't to touch anything." Hastings ducked under the makeshift barrier and entered the cottage. The interior was dim, the curtains drawn, but sufficient light filtered through to reveal the grim tableau. Mrs. McGinty lay sprawled in the sitting room, her body twisted unnaturally on the threadbare carpet. A pool of blood had congealed around her head, the wound a savage gash inflicted by something heavy and unforgiving. Nearby, a poker from the fireplace lay discarded, its end stained crimson, the likely weapon, though Hastings noted it seemed too obvious to conveniently placed. The room bore signs of a cursory search, drawers pulled open, papers scattered, a small safe in the corner ajar and empty. Robbery, then. Yet Mrs. McGinty was not a woman of means. Her treasures were tales, not trinkets. Hastings scanned the scene methodically, recalling Poirot's method, observed the details, the anomalies. A teacup sat untouched on the table, its contents cold. A newspaper, dated the previous day, was folded neatly beside it, headlines proclaiming mundane news, and there half hidden beneath a cushion. a crumpled envelope addressed to Mrs. McGinty in an elegant hand. The postmark from London. He resisted the impulse to examine it further, stepping back as voices heralded the arrival of Inspector Spence. The inspector was a solid, no-nonsense man in his 40s with a keen eye and a reputation for thoroughness. He greeted Hastings with a nod, recognizing him from past encounters. "Captain Hastings, fancy meeting you here. Not meddling, I hope. Merely observing, Inspector." Hastings replied with a wry smile. "A shocking affair. Any suspects?" Spence glanced at the body, his expression hardening. "Early days. But we've got our eye on James Bentley. He lodged with her until a fortnight ago, thrown out after a row. Claims he was at home all evening, but no alibi. And word is, Mrs. McGinty had something on him, some secret from his past." Hastings frowned. Bentley, with his pallid face and evasive eyes, did seem a likely candidate, the obvious suspect, perhaps too obvious. And the motive, robbery, possibly. Though what she'd have worth stealing is beyond me. No, this smells of something personal. Gossip like hers could make enemies. As the inspector set about directing his men, Hastings withdrew, his mind churning. The village was alive with rumor now, the fog doing little to dampen the spread of speculation. He encountered Colonel Summerhayes en route home, the colonel's face flushed with indignation. Damned outrage. The colonel blustered, his mustache quivering. McGinty was a meddler, but murder in Broadhinny. We'll have the culprit strung up. Evelyn Summerhayes, accompanying her husband, looked frail and shaken. "She was in our house yesterday," she murmured, chattering away about old times, and now this. Hastings noted the hesitation, the way her eyes darted away. Secrets indeed. The afternoon wore on, the fog lifting to reveal a sky heavy with impending rain. Villagers huddled in doorways, exchanging theories, a vagrant from the roads, a jealous rival, or perhaps a family grudge long buried. By evening, news of Bentley's arrest circulated. The young man had been taken into custody, protesting his innocence with a vehemence that rang hollow to many. Hastings dined alone, his appetite dimmed, pondering the envelope he had glimpsed. What correspondence could Mrs. McGinty have received that might precipitate such violence? As night fell, rain pattering against the windows, Hastings penned a letter to Poirot, not to summon him not yet, but to share the intrigue. Knowing his friend's insatiable curiosity, "A quaint little murder, mon ami," he wrote, imagining Poirot's mustache twitching in delight. "But something tells me it's not as simple as it seems." Unbeknownst to Hastings, across the village, alibis were being scrutinized in private thoughts. At Kilchester House, the Summerhayes couple argued in whispers. At Labenham's, Deirdre Elliott paced, her husband watching with narrowed eyes. And in the shadowed rooms of Mrs. Upwood's home, Robin toyed with a manuscript, his pen scratching out scenes of betrayal and death. The crime had been committed, the circle closed, and the web of deception began to tighten. Chapter 3. The arrival of Hercule Poirot. The rain that had begun the previous evening persisted into the morning, casting Broadhinny in a dreary pall that seemed to mirror the villagers' collective mood. The news of Mrs. McGinty's murder and James Bentley's arrest had spread like wildfire, igniting whispered conversations in every cottage and corner. Captain Hastings, however, found his thoughts preoccupied not with the villagers' gossip but with a letter he had dispatched to Hercule Poirot. He had written it almost impulsively, half expecting his friend to dismiss the matter as beneath his notice. Yet, as he sipped his morning tea, gazing out at the sodden green, he felt a familiar stirring, a premonition that Poirot's involvement was inevitable. By noon, the rain had softened to a drizzle, and Hastings was tending to his roses clad in a mackintosh, when a sleek black taxi rolled to a stop outside Rosebank. The door opened, and out stepped a figure unmistakable even in the mist. Hercule Poirot, his small, precise form immaculate in a tailored overcoat, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the weather, his egg-shaped head tilted slightly as he surveyed the cottage, his waxed mustache quivering with a hint of amusement or disapproval. Hastings could never be sure which. "Mon ami Hastings," Poirot called, his voice carrying the crisp clarity of a man who brooked no nonsense from the elements. "You summoned me to this outpost of civilization, with tales of murder most foul, and yet I find you gardening. Is this how you occupy yourself in retirement?" Hastings grinned, wiping his hands on a cloth as he approached. "Poirot, you old rogue. I didn't summon you, I merely wrote to keep you informed, but I'm glad you're here." Broadhinny's turned into a veritable nest of intrigue. Poirot's green eyes sparkled with interest. "Intrigue, you say? Bon. Then let us repair to your cottage, where you will recount all, and Hercule Poirot will bring order to this chaos with the little grey cells." Inside Rosebank, over a pot of strong tea and a plate of Mrs. Larkin's scones, Hastings recounted the events: Mrs. McGinty's brutal murder, the poker, the ransacked room, the mysterious envelope, and Bentley's arrest. Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled, his head cocked like a bird assessing a puzzle. When Hastings mentioned the envelope, Poirot's eyes narrowed. "An envelope, you say? From London, addressed to the unfortunate Madame McGinty. This is most curious. A woman of her station, forgive me, Hastings, but a charwoman does not typically receive correspondence from the metropolis." What did it contain? I couldn't see, Hastings admitted. The police were there, and I didn't want to interfere, but it looked personal, handwritten. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Personal, yes, and perhaps dangerous. Tell me, Hastings, this village, describe its denizens. Who are these people among whom murder has taken root? Hastings, obliged, sketching the cast of Broadhinny's characters, the bluff Colonel Summerhays and his fragile wife Evelyn, the theatrical Robin Upward and his domineering mother, Laura, the young Elliots, Patrick and Deirdre, with their city polish, the reclusive James Bentley, the meticulous Miss Weatherby and her war-scarred brother, Major Weatherby, the kindly Reverend, and Mrs. Banks, and Dr. Rendell, the village physician with a charming bedside manner. He mentioned Mrs. McGinty's penchant for gossip, her knack for uncovering secrets, and the unease her death had stirred. Poirot sipped his tea, his distaste for the English blend evident in the slight curl of his lip. A closed circle, as I like it, a village where everyone knows everyone, yet secrets abound. This Madame McGinty, she was, how you say, the collector of indiscretions. Such a person is dangerous, Hastings, for gossip is a currency that buys enemies. Now take me to the scene of this crime. I must see with my own eyes. The drizzle had ceased by the time they reached Mrs. McGinty's cottage, though the air remained damp and heavy. Constable Polk was still on duty, looking weary but vigilant. He recognized Poirot immediately, his face registering a mix of respect and resignation. Monsieur Poirot, sir, he said, touching his helmet. Inspector Spence said, you might turn up. You're welcome to look, but the scene's been secured. Mercy, Constable Poirot replied with a gracious nod. I require only to observe. The truth, it hides in the details. The cottage was much as Hastings had described, though the body had been removed, leaving a chalk outline on the carpet. Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker, his eyes darting over every surface. He noted the poker, now bagged by the police, and the scattered papers, which had been gathered into a pile. The teacup still sat on the table, its contents untouched, and Poirot paused to sniff it delicately. No poison, I think, he murmured. But the cup, it is significant. She was expecting a visitor, perhaps, or had one already when death arrived. He turned his attention to the spot where Hastings had seen the envelope. It was gone, likely taken by the police, but Poirot crouched to examine the cushion and the floor beneath. A letter, you say, handwritten. This suggests intimacy or importance. We must learn its contents. Stepping outside, Poirot surveyed the cottage's exterior, noting the unlatched gate and the absence of footprints in the muddy path washed away by the rain. No doubt, he questioned Polk about the timeline. Bessie Hill had discovered the body at 7 that morning, estimating death between 9 and 11 the previous night, based on the doctor's initial examination. The safe, emptied of a few pounds and some trinkets, suggested robbery, but Poirot's expression remained skeptical. Robbery, he said to Hastings as they walked back towards the green. A woman like Madame McGinty does not die for a few shillings. No, this is a crime of passion or necessity. Someone feared what she knew. Their next stop was the Three Crowns, where Poirot insisted on a light luncheon, though he grimaced at the menu simplicity. Mr. Cobb, the landlord, was eager to share what he knew, his ruddy face alight with the importance of his role. She was here the night before last, Cobb said, polishing a glass with vigor. Mrs. McGinty, in fine spirits, chatting with everyone. Said she'd come across something juicy. Her word wouldn't say what, but she had that look like she'd struck gold. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And who was present during this conversation? Oh, half the village, near enough. The Colonel and his missus, Dr. Rendell, Miss Weatherby, young Robin Upward. Even Bentley was there, sulking in a corner. Mrs. McGinty was teasing him about something, his book, I think. He didn't take kindly to it. Poirot thanked Cobb and led Hastings back into the drizzle, his mind clearly at work. This Bentley, he is the obvious choice. Nah, the police, they like the obvious, but I, Hercule Poirot, do not. We must speak to him, and to the others. Everyone in this village has a story, Hastings, and one of them is a lie. By afternoon, Poirot had arranged to visit the Summerhays at Kilchester House. The Colonel greeted them with forced joviality, offering sherry in the drawing-room where Evelyn sat with a strained smile, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Poirot's questions were gentle but probing, focusing on Mrs. McGinty's last visit. She was cleaning the attic, Evelyn said softly. She found some old letters, papers, from before we bought the house. She seemed excited, but I thought nothing of it. Just her usual chatter. Letters, madame. Poirot's voice was silk over steel. And where are these letters now? Evelyn hesitated, glancing at her husband. I don't know. She took them with her, I think. Or perhaps they're still in the attic. The Colonel snorted. Nonsense. Evelyn, the woman, was always poking about, probably nothing but old bills. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, perhaps. But I should like to see this attic, if I may. The attic was a dusty warren of crates and trunks, filled with relics of the house's former owners. Poirot examined it meticulously, finding nothing but cobwebs and faded photographs. Yet his silence suggested he had noted something significant, though he shared nothing with Hastings. As they left Kilchester House, Poirot paused on the drive, his gaze sweeping the village. Hastings, mon ami. This is a puzzle of human nature. Madame McGinty saw something or knew something that threatened someone's peace. We must find that something before another pays the price. Chapter 4. The interrogations commenced the morning following Hercule Poirot's arrival in Broadhinny brought a tentative clearing of the skies, as if the heavens themselves had decided to grant a brief respite from the gloom that had enveloped the village. Shafts of sunlight pierced the lingering clouds, casting a golden hue over the thatched roofs and the dukest green. Yet, despite this outward cheer, an undercurrent of unease persisted among the inhabitants, a palpable tension that Poirot sensed like a hound on the scent. He had risen early, as was his custom, partaking of a continental breakfast at the Three Crowns, much to Mr. Cobb's bemusement, for Poirot had insisted on tisane rather than the robust English tea, and then, now with Captain Hastings at his side, he set forth to begin his systematic questioning of the villagers. "Today, mon ami Poirot," declared as they strolled towards the post office, "we shall peel back the layers of this onion that is Broadhinny. Each person we speak to will reveal a sliver of truth, or perhaps a clever falsehood. But remember, Hastings, it is not merely what they say, but how they say. It's the flicker of an eye, the hesitation in the voice, the gesture that betrays the soul." Hastings nodded, his admiration for Poirot's method undimmed by the years. "Where do we start? Bentley is in custody, but perhaps the Weatherby's Miss Honoria runs the post office, and she's bound to have seen who posted that envelope." Poirot replied, his mustache twitching with approval. "The post office is the nerve center of village communication. Letters come and go. Secrets are stamped and sealed. Mademoiselle Weatherby shall be our first port of call." The post office was a quaint establishment adjoining the Weatherby's cottage, its interior a labyrinth of pigeonholes, stamps, and parcels. Miss Honoria Weatherby, tall and severe in her grey woolen dress, stood behind the counter like a guardian of epistolary mysteries. Her spectacles gleamed under the electric light, and her thin lips pursed as Poirot and Hastings entered, the bell tinkling merrily in contrast to her stern demeanor. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said crisply, her voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to handling official matters. "If it's stamps you require, I have the new comparatives, but I suspect this is about poor Mrs. McGinty." Poirot bowed slightly, his manner impeccable. "Mademoiselle, your perceptiveness does you credit. Indeed it is. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We seek to illuminate the shadows surrounding this tragic event. Might we impose upon you for a few moments?" Miss Weatherby adjusted her spectacles, a faint flush coloring her cheeks, whether from flattery or irritation. Hastings could not tell. "Very well, but I must attend to customers. What do you wish to know?" Poirot's eyes scanned the room, noting the neatly arranged ledgers and the calendar on the wall, marked with precise notations. "First, mademoiselle, tell me of Madame McGinty. Did she frequent this establishment?" "Oh, yes," Miss Weatherby replied, her tone laced with a hint of disdain. "She posted letters occasionally, mostly to relatives in the West Country, and she collected her pension here. Always full of chatter, that one. Too full, if you ask me. And recently, did she receive any unusual correspondence? An envelope from London, perhaps?" Miss Weatherby's hand paused mid-motion as she sorted stamps. "From London, let me think. Yes, 2 days before her death, there was a letter, hand-addressed, good quality paper. She seemed pleased about it, said it was from an old acquaintance. I didn't pry, of course." "Of course," Poirot echoed smoothly. "And the sender? Did you note the return address?" She shook her head. "No, it was plain on the back, but the postmark was Central London, SW1, I believe. I have an eye for such details." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "Most commendable. Now, where were you on the evening of the murder, between 9 and 11? Miss Weatherby's eyes narrowed behind her lenses. "At home, with my brother. We dined at 7, then listened to the wireless, the news, and a concert. Major Weatherby retired early. His leg troubles him in damp weather. I was in bed by 10, and your brother can confirm this. Naturally, though he's out walking now, tries to keep active despite the pain." As if summoned by mention, the door to the adjoining cottage opened, and Major Weatherby limped in. He was a man in his late 50s, his face lined with the etchings of old wounds, his mustache grey and bristling. "What's this, Poirot, eh? You'd poked your nose in. About time someone competent took charge." Poirot smiled urbanely. "Major, your confidence honors me. We were just discussing alibis. Yours, for the evening in question." The Major leaned on his cane, his gaze steady. "With Honoria, as she said. Wireless until 9:30, then bed. Leg was acting up, old shrapnel from the sum, didn't stir till morning." Poirot observed the Major's grip on the cane, noting the calluses that suggested frequent use. "And Madame McGinty, did she ever speak of secrets concerning you or your sister?" The siblings exchanged a glance, swift but telling. "Secrets," Miss Weatherby scoffed. "She gossiped about everyone. Said something once about our family's past. Nothing important. Old history from before the war." "Old history," Poirot repeated softly. "Ah, but history has a way of resurfacing. Nan, mercy for your time." As they left, Hastings whispered, Seemed nervous about that old history, do you think? Patience, Hastings. We collect the pieces, the picture forms later. Their next interview took them to the vicarage, a rambling house beside the church, where the Reverend and Mrs. Banks received them in the study. The Reverend, a mild-mannered man with a scholarly air, offered tea, while his wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, fidgeted with her knitting. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, the Reverend began. This dreadful business has shaken us all. Mrs. McGinty was a regular at services, though more for the social aspect, I fear. Poirot inclined his head. The social aspect. Yes, she was. Adept at it. Tell me, did she confide in you any troubles? Or perhaps you overheard her speaking of discoveries? Mrs. Banks' needles clicked faster. She did mention finding something in the summer haze at a cold letters, she said. Thought they might be valuable, but she was always exaggerating. Valuable how? Poirot pressed gently. Oh, historically perhaps. Or personally. She didn't elaborate. The Reverend cleared his throat. As for that night, we were here. Evening prayers at 8, then reading. Mrs. Banks retired at 10. I worked on my sermon till 11, and no visitors. No excursions. None, Mrs. Banks affirmed, though her eyes darted to her husband. It was a quiet evening. Poirot noted the slight tremor in her voice, the way her knitting formed uneven stitches. Quiet, indeed. And what of James Bentley? Did Madame McGinty speak ill of him? She said he was odd, the Reverend admitted. Unhappy about his writing. But murder, I can't believe it. Leaving the vicarage, Poirot murmured. They are protective, these Banks. But of what? The afternoon sun warmed the air as they proceeded to Laburnum's, the Elliots' cottage. Patrick Elliot, a neat man in a city suit, greeted them at the door, his wife Deirdre hovering behind, her vivacious beauty subdued by recent events. Come in, gentlemen, Patrick said, leading them to the sitting room, furnished with modern touches that jarred slightly with the village aesthetic. Shocking about Mrs. McGinty. We hardly knew her, being new here, yet she cleaned for you, Nan? Poirot queried, settling into a chair. Deirdre nodded, her curls bouncing once a week. She was chatty too, chatty, always asking about London, our friends there. And did she discover anything ... indiscreet? Patrick's jaw tightened. Nothing of note. She hinted at knowing people from our past, but it was bluff. Where were you that evening? Hastings interjected. Patrick glanced at his wife. Here, together. Dinner at 7, then bridge with the Rendles. They live nearby. Home by 10, bed by 11. The Rendles can confirm. Of course, Deirdre said quickly. It was a pleasant evening until we heard the news. Poirot's gaze lingered on Deirdre's hands, clasped tightly in her lap. Pleasant, yes, but perhaps not entirely carefree. Mercy. As they departed, Hastings remarked, they seemed on edge. Do you think an affair? Poirot chuckled. Ah, Hastings, always the romantic, but yes, tension there, perhaps financial, perhaps amorous. Their final interview of the day was at home, the home of Mrs. Laura Upward and her son Robin. The house was a villa of pretentious design, its drawing room filled with theatrical memorabilia, posters of past plays, signed photographs of actors. Mrs. Upward, a formidable woman in her 70s, sat enthroned in an armchair, her sharp eyes assessing Poirot like a director sizing up an actor. Robin, lounging nearby, smoked a cigarette with affected nonchalance. Monsieur Poirot, Mrs. Upward boomed, her voice trained for the stage. I've read of your exploits. Do sit, Robin. Offer refreshments. Robin complied lazily, pouring sherry. Ghastly about McGinty. She was a character fodder for one of my plays. Poirot accepted the glass. Plays about murder. Monsieur Upward, how apropos. Tell me of her last interactions with you. Mrs. Upward waved a bejeweled hand. She cleaned. Here Tuesdays. Found an old script in my trunk. Nothing important. But she prattled on about it, saying it reminded her of a real scandal. A scandal. Poirot's interest piqued. Something from the theater days. Robin interjected smoothly. Ancient history. She loved digging up dirt. And your whereabouts that night? Mrs. Upward straightened. Here, with Robin. We discussed his new play till 10, then bed. Robin nodded. Mother's right. No jaunts into the night for us. Poirot observed Robin's manicured hands unmarred by labor, and Mrs. Upward's imperious gaze, most domestic in Bentley. Any connection? He lodged here briefly, Robin said. Odd chap. McGinty teased him mercilessly. Perhaps he snapped. As they left, the sun dipping low, Poirot sighed. All have alibis. Hastings paired convenient. But alibis can be lies agreed upon. And the letters, the scandals they weave a thread. Back at the Three Crowns, Poirot pondered over a tisane, his little grey cells humming. Hastings, exhausted but exhilarated, sensed the net tightening, yet the village held its breath, secrets simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the master detective to expose them. Chapter 5. The red herrings multiplied. The sun rose over Broadhinny with a deceptive warmth, bathing the village in a golden glow that belied the chill of suspicion now permeating its lanes. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in a crisp suit despite the rural setting, sat at a small table outside the Three Crowns, his breakfast of croissants, a rare concession from Mr. Koba, accompanied by a steaming tisane. Captain Hastings joined him, his face reflecting a restless night spent pondering the interviews of the previous day. The village was astir with activity, yet an undercurrent of wariness lingered, as if each glance between neighbors carried an unspoken question. Who among us is a killer? Poirot, his eyes scanning the green where villagers went about their morning errands, spoke in a low, measured tone. Hastings, mon ami, we have heard the alibis, the stories, the denials. But now we must navigate the fog of deception. The police, they fixate on Monsieur Bentley, the obvious choice. Yet I, Hercule Poirot, suspect this is a red herring, designed to distract from the truth. Hastings buttered a scone, his brow furrowed. Bentley does seem the likely culprit, Poirot. He had a row with Mrs. McGinty, no alibi, and she was needling him about his writing. The police found his fingerprints on a glass in her cottage. Poirot's mustache twitched with disdain. Fingerprints. Pa, a man who lodges in a house leaves fingerprints as naturally as a bird leaves feathers. No, Hastings. The simplicity of Bentley's guilt is too convenient. We must look beyond the obvious, to the subtle threads that bind this village. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Spence, his face lined with the fatigue of a man grappling with a case that refused to resolve neatly. He tipped his hat to Poirot, settling heavily into a chair. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I trust you're stirring up the pot, as usual. We've got Bentley in the cells, but I'll admit, the case isn't airtight. No witnesses, no confession, just circumstance. Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of polite interest. And what, Inspector, are these circumstances? Precisely. Spence leaned forward, lowering his voice. Bentley was seen near McGinty's cottage around 8 that night. Mrs. Cobb saw him passing the inn. He claims he was walking to clear his head, but he's cagey about details. We found a scrap of paper in his room, a note in McGinty's hand. You can't hide it forever. Mr. B sounds like she had something on him, and the poker his prints are on it, though smudged. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A note to, say, most interesting. And the envelope, Hastings observed, from London. Spence hesitated. We have it, addressed to McGinty, postmarked SW.1, as Miss Weatherby said, but it's empty, no letter inside. Odd indeed, Poirot murmured, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. An empty envelope is as revealing as a full one, Inspector. It suggests the letter was taken by the killer, perhaps, to conceal its contents. Spence shrugged, unconvinced. Maybe she misplaced it. Anyway, Bentley's our man unless you turn up something better. He's got motive. McGinty was hounding him, and opportunity. Poirot smiled enigmatically. Motive and opportunity. Yes, but in Broadhinny, Inspector, these are as common as the sparrows. I shall continue my inquiries. After Spence departed, Poirot proposed a visit to Dr. Rendell, the village physician whose surgery adjoined the old vicarage. A doctor sees much, Hastings. He knows the ailments of the body and often of the heart. Let us see what secrets he holds. Surgery was a modern contrast to the village's antiquity. Its whitewashed walls and antiseptic scent a testament to Rendell's city training. The doctor, a handsome man in his early 40s with a disarming smile, greeted them with professional courtesy, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as Poirot introduced himself. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Rendell said, gesturing to chairs in his consulting room. A grim business, this murder. I examined the body for the police death by a single blow to the skull. Between 9 and 10:30, I'd estimate. The poker was the weapon, no doubt. Poirot nodded, his gaze fixed on Rendell's hands. Steady and practiced. You knew Madame McGinty well. Doctor, she cleaned for you, I believe. Occasionally, Rendell replied, leaning back. She was reliable, if a bit nosy. Liked to talk about my patients, though I never indulged her. And on the night of the murder, Poirot asked smoothly, your movements? Rendell's smile tightened. I was at the Elliots for bridge, as they'll confirm. Left around 10, home by 10:15. My wife can vouch for me after that. Your wife, Poirot repeated. She is not often seen in the village. Nan. Rendell's expression hardened. She's delicate, keeps to herself. Chronic fatigue, you understand. Poirot's nod was non-committal. And did Madame McGinty ever mention discoveries, letters perhaps, or scandals? Rendell hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing specific. She did say something about old papers at Kilchester House, but it was her usual gossip. As they left the surgery, Hastings remarked, he's hiding something, Poirot. That bit about his wife don't you think? Very odd, Poirot agreed. A wife who is a shadow, a doctor who is charming yet guarded. We shall return. To him, their next stop was the police station in Colhampton, where James Bentley was being held. The station was a squat brick building, its cells damp and cheerless. Bentley, pale and disheveled, sat hunched on a cot, his eyes darting nervously as Poirot and Hastings were shown in. Monsieur Bentley, Poirot began, his tone gentle yet commanding. I am Hercule Poirot. I seek the truth about Madame Death. Tell me of your relations with her. Bentley's voice was low, almost a whisper. She was difficult, always prying, mocking my writing. Said I'd never amount to anything, but I didn't kill her, I swear it. And the note, Poirot pressed. You can't hide it forever. What did she mean? Bentley's hands twisted together. I don't know. She was always hinting at things, my past, my family. I grew up in an orphanage. See, She claimed she knew something about my parents, but she wouldn't say what. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And that night you were seen near her cottage. I was walking, Bentley insisted. I often do. To think I didn't go in. I was home by 9, alone. As they left, Hastings shook his head. He's a wreck, Poirot. Guilty or not, he's not helping himself. None, Poirot said thoughtfully. He is frightened, but not necessarily of guilt. He fears what McGinty knew. We must find that knowledge. The afternoon saw them at Kilchester House again, where Poirot requested another look at the attic. Colonel Summerhays, grumbling about the intrusion, led them up the creaking stairs, while Evelyn followed, her face pale. The attic was as before, a jumble of trunks and dust, but Poirot's attention fixed on a small, locked box in a corner, overlooked in their previous visit. "This box, madame," he said to Evelyn. "It is yours." She shook her head. "It belonged to the previous owners. We never opened it, never had the key." Poirot examined the lock, noting scratches that suggested recent tampering. "Curious, perhaps Madame McGinty found a way." "That," Colonel snorted. "That woman was always poking about. If she opened it, she didn't tell us." As they descended, Poirot asked casually, "And your lodger, Monsieur Robin Upward? He is often here." Evelyn hesitated. "He visits Sieyes, for tea, or to discuss his plays. He's artistic." Back at the Three Crowns, Poirot sat in silence, his mind a whirl of connections. Hastings, sensing his friend's intensity, ventured, "Do you think the box is important, or Bentley's past?" "Both, perhaps," Poirot replied. "But the red herrings multiply, Hastings. Bentley is the bait dangled before us, but the real fish swims deeper. The letter, the box, the gossip, are pieces of a puzzle, and I suspect our killer is watching, hoping we chase the wrong scent." As dusk settled, the village seemed to close ranks, each alibi a brick in a wall of deception. Poirot, undeterred, planned his next move, his little grey cells weaving a tapestry of logic from the tangled threads of Broadhinny's secrets. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Three Crowns, casting delicate patterns across the breakfast table where Hercule Poirot sat, his tisane steaming gently before him. The village of though outwardly resuming its daily rhythms, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that Poirot's presence was a catalyst for truths yet to surface. Captain Hastings, joining his friend, noted the detective's air of quiet intensity, his green eyes sharp with the focus of a man piecing together a puzzle whose edges were only now becoming clear. "Mon ami," Poirot began, dabbing his lips with a napkin. "Today we seek the detail, the small, overlooked thing that reveals the contradiction. In every crime there is a moment where the guilty betray themselves, not in grand gestures but in the minutiae. We shall find it." Hastings nodded, his mind still turning over the previous day's interviews. "Bentley's note keeps nagging at me, Poirot. You can't hide it forever. It's too specific to be idle gossip. And that locked box in the attic, those scratches suggest someone tried to open it recently." Poirot's mustache twitched with approval. "Been observed, Hastings. The box and the note are threads in our tapestry. But we must also consider the teacup, the empty envelope, the timing of the alibis. Let us begin with a visit to Monsieur Cobb at the inn. He sees much, hears more, and may have noticed a detail that slipped past." The Three Crowns was bustling with morning custom, villagers exchanging subdued greetings over pints and newspapers. Mr. Cobb, polishing glasses behind the bar, greeted Poirot and Hastings with his usual joviality, though his eyes betrayed a wariness born of the village's recent upheaval. "Monsieur Cobb," Poirot said, settling onto a bar stool with the dignity of a monarch, "you are the eyes and ears of Broadhinny. On the night of Madame McGinty's death, you mentioned she was here 2 evenings prior, full of cheer. Did you observe anything unusual? Her manner, her words, a gesture?" Cobb paused, his cloth stilling on a glass. "Well, now you mention it, she was a bit distracted, kept looking at her bag, clutching it tight, not her usual open way, and when she left, she stopped at the door, looked back at young Bentley in the corner, and gave a queer little smile like she knew something he didn't." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A smile, you say? Most interesting. And who else was present?" That evening Cobb ticked off names on his fingers. The Summerhays, Dr. Rendell, Miss Weatherby, Robin Upward, the Bankses, and Deirdre Elliott. She was laughing with Rendell over something, though her husband wasn't there. "Left around 9, most of them." "And Bentley," Hastings interjected. "Did he leave with them?" "No. He stayed till closing near 10, sipped his ale looking glum. Didn't speak to McGinty after she teased him about his book." Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. "Merci, Monsieur Cobb. Your memory is a treasure. One more thing, did Madame McGinty ever mention a letter she received, or perhaps a discovery in someone's home?" Cobb scratched his chin. "Not directly, but she did say something odd that night. Said she'd found a bit of history that'd make folks sit up. Didn't say where, but I reckoned it was from one of her cleaning jobs, Kilchester House, most like." Leaving the inn, Poirot's expression was one of quiet satisfaction. "The bag, Hastings," she clutched it, as if protecting something precious. "The letter, perhaps, or something from that box. We must see this box again." Their next stop was Kilchester House, where Colonel Summerhays greeted them with barely concealed irritation. His face ruddy from a morning spent pruning roses, Evelyn, hovering in the background, seemed even more fragile. Her eyes shadowed as if sleep had eluded her. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, the Colonel barked, leading them to the drawing room. More questions. I've told you all I know. McGinty was a meddler, and now she's paid for it. Bentley's your man. Poirot's smile was serene. Perhaps, Colonel, but I am a man of details. I wish to examine the locked box in your attic once more. It may hold a clue to Madame McGinty's fate. The Colonel grumbled but acquiesced, leading them up the creaking stairs. The attic was as dusty as before, the small box still tucked in its corner. Poirot knelt beside it, his gloved fingers tracing the scratches around the lock. These marks, he murmured. They are recent, made with a crude Tula hairpin, perhaps, or a nail. Someone was determined to open it. Evelyn, standing at the attic door, clutched her shawl. I told you, we never had the key. It's been there since we bought the house. Poirot's eyes met hers, gentle but piercing. And yet, Madame, someone tried to open it. Did Madame McGinty ever speak of its contents? Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tightening on the shawl. She mentioned finding papers in the attic, but I thought it was just old bills or letters from the previous owners. She seemed excited, though said they were worth a pretty penny. I didn't take it seriously. The Colonel snorted. Nonsense. She was always spinning tales. Probably hoped to sell some junk to a collector. Poirot rose, brushing dust from his knees. Perhaps, but I should like this box opened, Colonel. May I have your permission to take it to a locksmith? The Colonel waved a dismissive hand. Take it, if it'll get you out of my hair. But it's nothing but clutter. Hastings carried the box downstairs, its weight surprisingly light. At Poirot's insistence, they took it to a locksmith in Colehampton, a wiry man named Mr. Perkins, who examined the lock with professional curiosity. Simple enough, he said, selecting a tool. Give me 10 minutes. As Perkins worked, Poirot murmured to Hastings, This box, it is the key to our mystery. Madame McGinty found something, within something that cost her life. The lock clicked open, revealing a small bundle of papers tied with faded ribbon. Poirot untied it carefully, revealing a collection of letters, yellowed with age, and a single photograph. The letters were written in a flowing hand, dated some 20 years prior, addressed to a my dearest El. The photograph showed a young woman, strikingly beautiful, with a man whose face was partially obscured by shadow. The back bore an inscription, Laura and E. 1930. Hastings gasped, Laura Mrs. Upward. And E. Could it be Evelyn Poirot's expression was grave. Or perhaps another E. We must tread carefully, Hastings. These are not mere relics. They are dynamite in the wrong hands. They returned to Broadhinny, the box and its contents, secured in Poirot's valise. Their next stop was the post office, where Miss Weatherby was sorting mail with her usual precision. Poirot, with the air of a conjurer, produced the photograph. Mademoiselle Weatherby, he said, do you recognize this woman? Miss Weatherby adjusted her spectacles, her face pulling. That's Laura Upward, years ago, before she was famous. Where did you find this? In a box Madame McGinty may have opened, Poirot replied. And the man, do you know him? She shook her head, but her hands trembled slightly. No, it's too dark to tell. This was before my time in Broadhinny. Poirot thanked her and withdrew, his mind racing. Back at the Three Crowns, he spread the letters on a table in his room, reading them with meticulous care. Love letters, Hastings, he said softly. Passionate, indiscreet. They speak of a forbidden affair, a scandal that could ruin reputations. And Madame McGinty, she found them, perhaps recognized their value, or their danger. Hastings frowned. Blackmail. Is that why she was killed? Possibly, Poirot said. But the question is, who was threatened? Laura Upward, Evelyn Summerhays, or the mysterious E. We must observe their reactions. That evening, Poirot arranged to dine with the Upwards, intending to gauge Mrs. Upward's response to the photograph. The dinner was a tense affair, Mrs. Upward dominating the conversation with tales of her theatrical past, while Robin toyed with his food, his eyes flickering nervously. When Poirot casually mentioned old photographs, Mrs. Upward's hand froze on her wineglass. Photographs, she said sharply. What sort? From the past, Poirot replied, watching her closely. Perhaps from your days on the stage. Her laugh was brittle. All those sentimental nonsense, nothing worth digging up. Robin changed the subject abruptly, launching into a monologue about his latest play. But Poirot noted the exchange of glances between mother and son, the unspoken tension that hung like a storm cloud as they left Holmola. Hastings whispered, She knows something, Poirot. That photograph rattled her. Poirot agreed, and the detail the smile Cobb saw, the clutched bag, the scratched lock, these are the cracks in the facade. Tomorrow, we press harder. The truth is close, Hastings, but it hides behind a veil of fear. The village settled into an uneasy night, the stars obscured by gathering clouds. Poirot in his room reread the letters, his little grey cells alight with possibilities. Somewhere in Broadhinny a killer watched, aware that the net was tightening. Chapter 7. More lies surfaced. The air in Broadhinny carried a crisp edge as autumn tightened its grip, the leaves on the village green turning shades of amber and crimson. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the chill, sat at his usual table outside. The 3 Crowns, his tisane replaced by a cup of hot chocolate, a rare indulgence. He assured Hastings to sharpen the little grey cells. The village bustled with cautious normalcy, but the undercurrent of fear was palpable, as if each villager sensed the tightening of Poirot's invisible net. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, joined him, his face etched with the strain of piecing together the fragments of the mystery. Mon ami Poirot began, his voice low and deliberate. We have uncovered a thread: the letters, the photograph, the whispers of scandal, but now the lies begin to unravel. Today we shall probe deeper, seeking the hidden affairs, the financial motives, the bitter feuds that Madame McGinty's gossip threatened to expose. Hastings nodded, his thoughts lingering on the previous day's discoveries. Those letters, Poirot, they're explosive. If Mrs. Upwood is L, and E is someone still in the village, McGinty could have been blackmailing one of them. But who? Evelyn Summerhays, or perhaps Dr. Rendell? Given his guarded manner, Poirot's eyes gleamed with approval. You begin to think like Poirot, Hastings. Yes, the letters suggest a past indiscretion, but we must also consider money, jealousy, revenge. Let us visit the Elliots. There is something in their polished facade that does not quite shine. Laburnum's, the Elliots' cottage, stood bathed in morning light, its roses meticulously tended, a stark contrast to the turmoil within the village. Deirdre Elliot answered the door, her bright smile faltering as she recognized Poirot's diminutive figure. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said, her voice a touch too bright. Do come in. Patrick's just finishing some paperwork. The sitting room was a blend of London sophistication and rural charm, with modern furniture clashing slightly with the cottage's low beams. Patrick Elliot emerged from a small study, his expression guarded but polite. Gentlemen, he said, offering chairs. More questions about poor Mrs. McGinty? We've told you all we know. Poirot settled into a chair, his posture impeccable. Monsieur Elliot, Madame, I seek only to clarify. Madame McGinty, she was a woman who saw much in her work. Did she ever speak to you of discoveries, perhaps papers, or secrets from the past? Deirdre's laugh was nervous, her fingers toying with a pearl necklace. Oh, she was always chattering about everyone. She hinted once about knowing people from our London days, but it was vague. Just her way of seeming important, I suppose. Patrick's jaw tightened. She was a busybody. If she found something, she didn't share it with us. Poirot's gaze was gentle but unyielding. And your financial affairs, monsieur? I understand you work in insurance, a profession that thrives on trust. Were there difficulties that Madame McGinty might have stumbled upon? Patrick's face reddened. What are you implying? Our finances are sound. I've had a good year, better than most. Deirdre interjected quickly. Really, Monsieur Poirot? We're new here. We barely knew her. That night, we were at bridge with the Rendells, as we said. Poirot noted the quick defense, the way Deirdre's eyes flicked to her husband, of course, and after bridge. You returned home directly? Yes, Patrick said curtly. By 10:15 we went to bed. As they left, Hastings whispered, They're hiding something, Poirot. That bit about finances. Patrick was too quick to defend. We, Poirot replied. A nerve was touched. Perhaps Madame McGinty saw papers in their home-built letters, something that suggested ruin or deceit. Their next visit was to Holmala, where Mrs. Laura Upwood received them in her theatrical drawing room, surrounded by relics of her stage career. Robin was absent, attending a rehearsal in Colhampton, she said. Her imperious presence filled the room, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as Poirot produced a photograph from the attic box. Madame Upwood, he said softly, this image, from 1930. You are the L. Nan, and the man E. Who is he? Mrs. Upwood's hand trembled as she took the photograph, her face a mask of controlled emotion. This is ancient history, Monsieur Poirot. A moment from my youth, nothing more. I don't recall the man's name. It was a fleeting acquaintance. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, yet Madame McGinty thought it significant. She found this, and letters, in a box at Kilchester House. Did she speak to you of them? Mrs. Upwood's laugh was sharp. She mentioned finding some old papers. Yes, said they might interest a historian. I told her to throw them out. She was always dramatizing. And your son Robin, did he know of these papers? Her eyes narrowed. Robin, no, he's too busy with his plays. Why do you ask? Poirot inclined his head, merely to understand. And that night, where was Robin? Precisely. Here, with me, she said firmly. We discussed his script until 10. He's no murderer, Monsieur Poirot. As they departed, Hastings remarked, She's protecting Robin, isn't she? That photograph shook her. Indeed, Poirot said. But is it her past, or her son's future? She guards. We must learn more of this. Their final visit was to the vicarage, where the Reverend and Mrs. Banks were tending to parish duties. The Reverend was compiling a sermon, while Mrs. Banks arranged flowers for the church. Poirot's questions were gentle, focusing on Mrs. McGinty's gossip. She did mention a scandal once. Mrs. Banks admitted, her hands busy with roses. Something about a child, long ago, given up or lost. She wouldn't say whose, but she looked at me oddly, as if I might know. The Reverend frowned. She was indiscreet, but harmless. I can't imagine anyone killing her over gossip. Poirot's eyes lingered on Mrs. Banks' hands, noting a faint scar on her wrist, barely visible beneath her sleeve. "And your evening, madame? You retired at 10, but before that?" Mrs. Banks hesitated. "I went to the church briefly, around 9, to check the hymnal. Alone. I was back by 9:30. The Reverend nodded. "I was here, working. We don't lock the vicarage. Anyone could confirm I was home." Poirot thanked them and left, his mind churning. "A child, Hastings," he murmured. "A secret adoption, perhaps. And Mrs. Banks, solitary or convenient, not back at the Three Crowns." Poirot requested a meeting with Inspector Spence, who arrived with news. "We've searched Bentley's room again," Spence said. "Found a hidden diary, nothing incriminating, but it mentions McGinty pestering him about his origins. He's an orphan, you know. Seems she thought he was connected to someone in the village." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Connected? How intriguing. And the empty envelope? Still nothing. "But we're keeping Bentley. His story's shaky, and the village is baying for a culprit." Poirot dismissed Spence with thanks, then turned to Hastings. "The lies surface, mon ami. Financial strain for the Elliots, a scandal for Mrs. Upwood, a child for the Bankses, and Bentley's mysterious past. But the detail, the scar on Mrs. Banks' wrist, the photographs, the notes, these are the keys." That evening, Poirot sat alone in his room. The letters spread before him. One, dated July 1930, caught his eye. "My dearest L, our secret must remain buried, for he would never forgive us. The child is safe, but the truth would destroy us all." He closed his eyes, his little gray cells weaving connections. A child, a scandal, a murder to silence the truth. Broadhinny's secrets were unraveling, and the killer's shadow loomed closer. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The morning broke over Broadhinny with a deceptive calm, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the village green, where the first fallen leaves swirled in a gentle breeze. Hercule Poirot, ever punctual, emerged from the Three Crowns, his overcoat buttoned against the morning chill, his eyes alight with the quiet determination of a man nearing a breakthrough. Captain Hastings, joining him for breakfast, sensed a shift in his friend's demeanor, subtle intensity that suggested the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align. "Mon ami," Poirot said, sipping his tisane with measured precision. "We have gathered the threads, the letters, the photograph, the note, the alibis. But today we seek the crack in the human heart, the moment when someone breaks and reveals a truth, however partial. It is in these moments of weakness that the guilty betray themselves." Hastings nodded, his thoughts tangled with the revelations of the previous day. That letter about a child, Poirot, it's haunting. Mrs. Banks seemed shaken when she mentioned it, and Mrs. Upwood's reaction to the photograph. She's hiding something, I'd wager. But how do we make them crack? Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. By applying pressure, Hastings, not with force, but with the gentle nudge of psychology. We shall stir the waters and see what rises. Their first stop was the vicarage, where the Reverend and Mrs. Banks were preparing for the Sunday service. The church bells tolled softly, a solemn backdrop to the tension within the village. Mrs. Banks, arranging hymnals in the vestry, looked up as Poirot and Hastings entered, her hands trembling slightly, the scar on her wrist catching the light. "Madame Banks," Poirot began, his tone soft yet penetrating. "You spoke yesterday of a child, the secret Madame McGinty hinted at. I sense this weighs upon you. Will you not share what you know? The truth. It liberates the soul." Mrs. Banks' eyes widened, her hands clutching a hymnal as if it were a lifeline. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot." She was vague, always vague. "Just gossip." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "And yet, madame, your eyes tell a different story. A child, given up or lost, 20 years ago. Did Madame McGinty know something of your past? Or perhaps the Reverend Banks, entering from the nave, overheard the question and froze. "What's this about a child?" "Monsieur Poirot, my wife and I have no secrets. McGinty was a meddler, nothing more." Poirot's smile was gentle but unrelenting. "No secrets, monsieur. Yet Madame McGinty's gossip had a way of unearthing truths. Tell me, madame, of that evening walk to the church. You were alone, you said. Did you see anyone near Madame McGinty's cottage?" Mrs. Banks' face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. I saw someone, yes, a figure, in the fog, near her gate. I couldn't see who, it was too dark. I thought nothing of it, but now," her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. The Reverend rushed to her side, his face pale. "Edith, you never told me. Why didn't you speak to the police?" "I was afraid," she whispered, "afraid it would look suspicious. I only went to check the hymnals, I swear." Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was racing. "A figure, madame, male or female, tall or short?" "I couldn't tell," she sobbed. "It was just a shadow, moving quickly. I didn't want to get involved." The Reverend's voice was sharp. "That's enough, Monsieur Poirot. You're upsetting her. We've told you all we know." Poirot inclined his head. "For now, monsieur, but the truth, it has a way of surfacing." As they left the vicarage, Hastings whispered, "She's breaking Poirot. That figure she knows more than she's saying. Oui, Poirot replied. But her fear is genuine. She saw something, or someone, and it terrifies her. We must keep watch on Madame Banks. Their next visit was to Dr. Rendell's surgery, where the doctor was attending to a patient. They waited in the antiseptic waiting room, Hastings fidgeting, while Poirot sat serenely, his hands folded. When Rendell emerged, his charming smile was in place, but his eyes were wary. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, he said, gesturing to his consulting room. What brings you back? I've told you my movements. Poirot's tone was deceptively casual. Indeed, Doctor, but I am curious about your wife, Madame McGinty. She cleaned for you. Did she ever mention perhaps her health, or her absence from village life? Rendell's smile faltered. My wife is unwell, as I said. Chronic fatigue. McGinty asked about her once or twice, but I discouraged gossip. She was too curious for her own good. Poirot produced the photograph, watching Rendell closely. His image, Doctor. From 1930, do you recognize the man? Rendell's hand hesitated as he took the photograph, his face impassive. No, I don't. It's too dark. And I wasn't in Broadhinny then. I came here 5 years ago. Yet Madame McGinty thought it significant, Poirot pressed. She spoke of scandals, of secrets. Did she ever hint at your past? Rendell's jaw tightened. She hinted at many things, none true. If you're suggesting I had reason to silence her, you're mistaken. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I suggest nothing, Doctor. I merely observe. Your alibi. It is solid. The Elliots confirm your bridge game, but alibis, they can be arranged. Rendell stood abruptly. I have patience to see. Good day. As they left, Hastings muttered, He's rattled. That photograph hit a nerve. Indeed, Poirot said. But it is not just the photograph. His wife, this phantom figure. There is a story there. We must meet her. Their final stop was Kilchester House, where Evelyn Summerhays received them alone, the Colonel having gone to Culhampton on business. She looked frail, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief as she led them to the drawing-room. Madame Poirot began gently. The letters we found in the attic box, they speak of a child, a scandal. Did Madame McGinty ever mention such things to you? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, and she sank into a chair. She shitted. She found those letters and asked if I knew about them. I told her they were old, irrelevant, but she kept pressing, saying they could ruin someone. I begged her to leave it alone. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft. And who, madam, would be ruined? Evelyn's voice broke. I don't know. I swear I don't. But she looked at me as if I were part of it. I've no children, Monsieur Poirot. But years ago, in India, there was a miscarriage. I never told anyone, not even Arthur. McGinty must have heard rumors. Hastings gasped, but Poirot's expression remained calm. And that night, Madame, you were with the Colonel. Yes, she whispered, but I couldn't sleep. I walked in the garden, alone, around 9:30. I saw no one, but I felt. Watched. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Watched. Madame, by whom? I don't know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I was so afraid. I've been afraid ever since. As they left Kilchester House, Hastings said, She's terrified, Poirot. And that miscarriage, could it be the child in the letters? Perhaps, Poirot replied. But the fear in this village, it is a contagion. Mrs. Banks saw a shadow. Evelyn felt watched. The truth is breaking through. Hastings like cracks in ice. That evening, Poirot sat in his room at the Three Crowns, the letters and photograph before him. He reread the note about the child, his mind weaving connections. A child, a scandal, a secret buried for 20 years, he murmured. Madame McGinty uncovered it, and someone ensured her silence. But who? As night fell, Broadhinny seemed to draw inward, its secrets pulsing beneath the surface. Poirot, his little grey cells, alight, knew the emotional cracks were widening, and the killer's composure was fraying. Chapter 9. The gathering storm. It was a chill evening in the village of Broadhinny, the kind that seemed to wrap the old stone cottages in a shroud of mist, as if the very air conspired to keep secrets buried. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, had spent the afternoon pacing the garden of the Long Meadows cottage where Poirot and I were lodged, my mind a whirl of conjectures. Poirot, ever the epitome of calm, had been ensconced in the sitting-room, his small, neat hands folded over his egg-shaped head, eyes half closed in that deceptive repose which I knew masked the furious activity of his little grey cells. He had summoned me earlier that day with a cryptic note. Mon ami, the time approaches. Prepare for the assembly. All must be in order. The assembly, as he termed it, was to take place at the vicarage, a rambling Georgian house at the edge of the village green, kindly lent by the Reverend Mr. Hargreaves, who, though not directly implicated, had his own reasons for unease in this affair. Mrs. McGinty's death struck down in her humble parlour with a blunt instrument. Her gossiping tongue, silenced forever, had rippled through Broadhinny like a stone cast into a still pond. The suspects, that tight-knit circle of villagers whose lives she had so assiduously probed, were to be gathered under one roof. Poirot had insisted on it, arranging the invitations with the precision of a general deploying his troops. As twilight deepened, I accompanied Poirot to the vicarage. He walked with his usual mincing step, his patent leather shoes gleaming even in the dim light, his moustaches waxed to perfection. "Hastings," he said, glancing sideways at me, "you will observe tonight the art of the psychological siege. It is not with force that one breaches the walls of deceit, but with the subtle probe, the word unspoken, the glance that lingers. Watch their faces, mon ami. The guilty one will betray themselves, for the conscience is a fragile thing." We arrived to find the drawing-room already filling. Inspector Grange, the local police official, stood by the fireplace, his burly frame, ill at ease in the refined surroundings, puffing on a pipe as if to fortify himself against Poirot's methods. "Evening, Monsieur Poirot," he grunted. "Hope this little charade of yours pays off. We've got James Bentley in custody already. Fits the bill, if you ask me." Poirot inclined his head politely but said nothing, his green eyes flickering with that inner amusement I knew so well. Bentley, the lodger in Mrs. McGinty's house, had indeed seemed the obvious culprit, a quiet, unemployed man with a grudge against her prying ways, found with traces of blood on his cuff. But Poirot had dismissed the arrest as premature, insisting the true motive lay deeper, entwined in the web of village secrets Mrs. McGinty had uncovered in her role as charwoman to the great and the good. The suspects filed in one by one, their faces masks of forced civility. First came Mrs. Rendell, the doctor's wife, her elegant silk dress rustling as she took a seat on the chintz sofa. She was a woman of poise, with sharp features and eyes that darted about like a bird's, but I noted the faint tremor in her hands as she clutched a handbag. Her husband, Dr. Rendell, followed, his professional demeanor cracked by a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights. Rumors fueled by Mrs. McGinty's loose tongue had whispered of his financial troubles, debts from ill-advised investments, and perhaps something more sinister involving a patient who had died under mysterious circumstances. Next entered Major Hayes, retired from the Indian Army, his mustache bristling like a hedgehog's spines. He nodded curtly to us, choosing a chair by the window where he could survey the room like a sentry. His wife, the vivacious Maureen Summerhays, trailed behind, her laughter a trifle too bright, her cheeks flushed. They ran the local guest house, and Mrs. McGinty had cleaned for them. She had, it seemed, overheard heated arguments about money and infidelities that threatened their precarious social standing. Then came Eve Carpenter, the young actress who had recently married the wealthy but dour Roger Carpenter. She swept in, with theatrical grace, her fur stole draped artfully over her shoulders, but her eyes held a haunted look. Roger followed, his face set in grim lines, his hand possessively on her arm. Mrs. McGinty had worked at their modern villa on the hill, and whispers suggested she had discovered compromising letters that could shatter their facade of marital bliss. Lastly, Miss Deirdre Henderson arrived, the spinster niece of the late Mrs. Upwood, an eccentric playwright who had passed away some months prior under circumstances Poirot had deemed most intriguing. Deirdre was plain and unassuming, her dress dowdy, but her gaze was steady, almost defiant. Mrs. McGinty had been in service at the Upwood household too, and it was said she had knowledge of a will that favored Deirdre unexpectedly. Cutting out other relatives. The room, with its heavy velvet curtains and polished oak furniture, grew heavy with anticipation. Poirot positioned himself at the center, in a high-backed chair that seemed almost a throne, his small stature belying the authority he exuded. I stood beside him, notebook in hand, ready to record any revelations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice clear and accented, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "I thank you for coming this evening. It is not for pleasure that we assemble, Nan, but for justice. The death of Mrs. McGinty, a woman of humble station, yet one who saw much in the houses she cleaned, demands resolution. She was struck down, not in rage, I believe, but in cold calculation, to silence her knowledge." A ripple of unease passed through the group. Mrs. Rendell shifted her fingers, twisting a handkerchief. Major Summerhays cleared his throat loudly. Poirot continued, his eyes scanning each face. "Each of you had motive. Madame Rendell, your husband's debts. Mrs. McGinty knew of the forged prescriptions, did she not? And you, Major, your arguments with your wife over that affair with a young lieutenant overheard in the guest-house parlor. Madame Carpenter, those letters from your former admirer, hidden but not well enough. Monsieur Carpenter, your jealousy that drove you to threats. And Mademoiselle Henderson, the will of your aunt altered perhaps, with Mrs. McGinty's unwitting." Witness gasps echoed. Dr. Rendell half rose, his face red. "This is preposterous. You have no proof." "Proof, mon cher docteur." Poirot raised a hand. "Ah, but the proof is in the details. The little inconsistencies. For instance, the clock in Mrs. McGinty's parlor stopped at 8:47, yet her neighbor heard her humming at 9 o'clock. An alibi shattered, and the footprint in the garden size 9. But Bentley wears 8s. No, it is not he." Inspector Grange frowned. His pipe forgotten. "Then who?" Man spit it out. Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience, Inspector. We must apply the pressure, as one squeezes the lemon for its juice. Let us consider the red herrings. The blood on Bentley's cuff, planted, perhaps, by one who knew he would be suspected. The missing poker from the fireplace found in the Summerhays shed. But why there?" Maureen Summerhays paled. I don't know what you mean." "Ah, but you do, madame, your husband, his temper." "But no, it is not so simple." Poirot leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that compelled attention. Mrs. McGinty was a gossip, yes, but she was also a blackmailer. None, not quite. She collected snippets, like a magpie collects shiny things. But one snippet was, deadly, a connection to an old crime, a murder disguised as accident, the death of Mrs. Upwood, poisoned subtly, her will forged to benefit, whom Deirdre Henderson's hands clenched. My aunt died naturally, the doctor said. Dr. Rendell said, Poirot interjected smoothly, but the symptoms, nausea, convulsion, suggest arsenic. And Mrs. McGinty, cleaning the house, found the residue in a teacup, hidden away. She confronted the killer, demanded money, or perhaps silence for a price. The room tensed. Eve Carpenter whispered to her husband, who shook his head fiercely. Poirot rose, pacing slowly. Let us reconstruct. On the night of the murder at 8:30, Mrs. McGinty was seen arguing with a shadowy figure at her door. Who was it? You, Madame Rendell, claiming to deliver laundry, or you, Major, on your evening walk? I was at home, Major Summerhays barked. With your wife, but she was at the cinema in the next town, ticket stub dated, but alone. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Alibis crumble, like sand. Dr. Rendell mopped his brow. This is intolerable. You're accusing us all. Nan, only one. But to flush the fox, we must beat the bushes. Poirot stopped before Deirdre. Mademoiselle, your aunts play the gossamer web about a murder. Who poisons for inheritance? Life imitates art. Mrs. McGinty read the manuscript, saw the parallels. Deirdre's face drained of color. I love my aunt, perhaps, but love and greed mingle strangely. Poirot turned to the group. Tonight, someone will crack. I know the truth, but I give you the chance to confess. The police wait outside. Silence fell, thick as fog. I watched, heart pounding, as beads of sweat formed on foreheads, glances exchanged like daggers. Mrs. Rendell buried her face in her hands. Roger Carpenter gripped his wife's arm until she winced. Chapter 10. The unraveling thread. The vicarage drawing room seemed to shrink under the weight of Poirot's words, the air thick with suspicion and dread. The suspects sat frozen, their faces a gallery of fear, defiance, and confusion, as if each had been pinned under a microscope by the little Belgian detective's unrelenting gaze. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, stood by the fireplace, my notebook trembling slightly in my hand, struggling to keep pace with a torrent of revelations. Eve Carpenter's tear-streaked confession had sent a shockwave through the room, yet Pat declared it false, a noble lie to shield another. The true killer, he insisted, still lurked among us, and now the trap was set to spring. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame radiating authority, his green eyes darting from face to face with the precision of a fencer seeking an opening. The heavy velvet curtains behind him framed the scene like a stage, and I could not shake the sense that we were all players in one of his meticulously crafted dramas. Inspector Grange, his pipe now cold, leaned forward, his skepticism warring with curiosity. Monsieur Poirot, he growled, you've got us all on edge. If Mrs. Carpenter's lying, who's the real culprit? Let's have it. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture as delicate as it was commanding. Patience, Inspector. The truth, it is like a fine tapestry. Pull one thread, and the whole design unravels. But we must pull the right thread. See, Pa. He turned to Eve Carpenter, who sat crumpled on the sofa, her husband Roger gripping her hand as if to anchor her against the storm. Madame, your confession was touching, but it does not hold. The poker, you say you used it in a moment of passion. Yet the blow to Mrs. McGinty's head was precise, deliberate, not the wild strike of panic. And the footprint, size 9, you claim you wore your husband's shoe, but the tread, it was not his. No, someone else planned this crime with care. Eve's eyes widened, her breath catching. I don't understand. I told you everything. Madame, you told me what you wished me to believe. Poirot's voice was soft, almost pitying. You protect someone, perhaps your husband, whose jealousy Mrs. McGinty threatened to expose, or another, whose secret is deeper still. Roger Carpenter lurched to his feet, his face mottled with anger. This is outrageous. My wife's confessed. Why drag this out? You're tormenting her. Poirot's gaze flicked to him unperturbed. Monsieur, sit. The truth does not yield to temper. Let us examine the facts methodically, as Hercule Poirot always does. He began to pace, his polished shoes clicking on the oak floor, each step punctuating his words. Mrs. McGinty was killed because she knew too much, not merely gossip, but a secret tied to an earlier crime. The death of Mrs. Upwood, poisoned with arsenic, disguised as heart failure. Mrs. McGinty, cleaning the Upwood house, found evidence, a teacup with residue, perhaps, or a letter implicating the poisoner. She did not blackmail, no, but she hinted, she probed, and the killer could not risk exposure. A murmur rippled through the room. Deirdre Henderson, the spinster niece of Mrs. Upwood, sat rigid, her knuckles white as she clutched the arms of her chair. Dr. Rendell mopped his brow, his professional calm fraying. Mrs. Rendell's sharp eyes darted to her husband, then away. Major Summerhays coughed, his military bearing strained, while Maureen, his wife, toyed nervously with her bracelet. Poirot stopped before Deirdre. Mademoiselle Henderson, your aunt's will altered to favor you, cutting out a distant cousin. Mrs. McGinty cleaned the study where the will was kept. She saw something, a draft, perhaps, or a forged signature. Did she confront you? Deirdre's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. I told you, Monsieur Poirot, my aunt's death was natural. The will was her wish. I had no reason to harm anyone, perhaps, Poirot mused. But the arsenic in Mrs. Upwood's teat was no accident, and Mrs. McGinty, she knew. She was not discreet, our charwoman. She dropped hints, yes, to you or to another. He turned abruptly to Dr. Rendell. And you, Monsieur le Docteur, your prescriptions, Mrs. McGinty cleaned your surgery, found records of drugs unaccounted for, arsenic perhaps diverted from your stock, your debts, they pressed heavily, a wealthy patient's death. Her will changed convenient. None. Dr. Rendell's face flushed crimson. I've had enough of your insinuations. I'm a doctor, not a murderer. Calm yourself, Poirot said sharply. The guilty always protest the loudest. He pivoted to Major Hayes. And you, Major, your temper, your arguments, with your wife, overheard by Mrs. McGinty. She knew of your financial troubles, the guest house failing, a wealthy widow's death, an inheritance redirected. Did it tempt you? The Major's mustache quivered. Preposterous. I'd never stoop to such a thing. Maureen Summerhays burst out. Leave him alone. We're not killers. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. No. Then let us consider the timeline. Mrs. McGinty died at approximately 9 p.m., yet the clock was stopped at 8:47. Why? To suggest an earlier time of death. The neighbor, Mrs. Elliot, heard humming at 9 o'clock. Mrs. McGinty was alive then. The killer, they were clever, but not clever enough. The footprint in the garden, size 9, but not Mr. Carpenter's shoe, nor Bentley's. I examined the tread. It matches a pair owned by someone in this room. All eyes turned to the suspect's feet, as if expecting the shoes themselves to confess. I scribbled furiously, trying to follow Poirot's logic. He was building to something. I could feel it, but the pieces eluded me. Now, Poirot continued, let us reconstruct the night of the murder. Mrs. McGinty was in her parlor, perhaps sorting her snippets of gossip letters, notes, a play, manuscript from Mrs. Upwood's house. The killer arrived, perhaps under pretense of a visit. An argument ensued. The poker was seasoned out from the fireplace, but from the shed, where it had been hidden after another use. The blow was struck. The clock stopped. The scene staged. But one detail betrays the killer. A single thread of green wool, caught in the garden gate, torn from a scarf. A gasp escaped Mrs. Rendell. Her hand flew to her throat, where a green scarf was loosely knotted. That proves nothing, she cried. Anyone could own a green scarf for a month. Poirot's eyes gleamed. But this thread, it matches precisely the weave of your scarf, madame. And you were seen near Mrs. McGinty's cottage at 8:30, delivering laundry, a flimsy excuse. You who knew of your husband's debts, his access to arsenic, his role in Mrs. Upwood's death. You who feared Mrs. McGinty's gossip would expose it all. Dr. Rendell leapt up. She's innocent, I swear it. Poirot's voice cut like a whip. Sit, monsieur. Your defense is gallant, but it condemns you. You administered the arsenic to Mrs. Upwood, falsified her death certificate. Your wife knew, and when Mrs. McGinty threatened to talk, she acted to protect you and herself. Mrs. Rendell sobbed, her composure shattered. I didn't mean to kill her. She laughed at me, said she'd tell everyone about John's arsenic, the will. I grabbed the poker. It was so quick. Dr. Rendell sank back, his face ashen. Laura, no. Poirot nodded gravely. Madame, you have confessed. The thread, the footprint, the stopped clock all point to you. But it was your husband's crime that set this in motion. The arsenic, procured from his surgery, killed Mrs. Upwood. You killed Mrs. McGinty to silence her. Inspector Grange stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Doctor and Mrs. Rendell, you're both under arrest. The room erupted in murmurs. Deirdre, Henderson wept quietly, perhaps relieved. The Carpenters clung to each other, their own secrets safe for now. Major Summerhays and Maureen exchanged glances, their tension easing. Poirot turned to me, his voice low. Hastings, the human heart. It is a labyrinth, but the little grey cells, they find the way. As the Rendells were led away, I marveled at Poirot's genius. The thread, the footprint, the clock, such small things, yet they had unraveled. A tapestry of deceit, but a nagging thought lingered. Had Poirot revealed all, or was there another thread yet to pull? Chapter 11. The Echoes of Truth. The vicarage drawing room. So lately a cauldron of tension and accusation, now settled into an uneasy hush as Dr. and Mrs. Rendell were escorted out by Inspector Grange and his constables. The heavy oak door closed behind them with a finality that echoed through the house, leaving the remaining souls in a state of stunned relief mingled with lingering shadows of doubt. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, lingered by the fireplace. My notebook closed at last, though my mind raced with the whirlwind of events. Poirot's revelation had been masterful, as always a symphony of logic where each note, each clue, had built to an inexorable crescendo. Yet, as the suspects dispersed, murmuring their farewells and avoiding one another's eyes, I could not shake the feeling that the curtain had fallen too neatly. Too soon, Poirot himself remained seated in his high-backed chair, his small hands steepled before him, his moustaches impeccably aligned. As if the drama had been but a minor diversion in an otherwise orderly evening, the Reverend Mr. Hargreaves, our host, hovered nearby, his clerical collar slightly askew, offering tea with a trembling hand. "A most extraordinary affair, Monsieur Poirot," he ventured, his voice quavering. "The village will sleep easier tonight, knowing justice has been served." Poirot inclined his head graciously. "Justice, mon reverend, is a delicate balance. It is not merely the punishment of the guilty, but the restoration of order to the disordered mind." He rose then, with that precise, cat-like movement I knew so well, and gestured for me to join him. "Come, Hastings. The night grows late, and the little grey cells, they require repose." We bid good night to the vicar and stepped out into the misty village green. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys, and the stars above pierced the haze like distant clues in a vast puzzle. As we walked toward our lodgings at Long Meadows, the gravel path crunching underfoot, I could contain my questions no longer. "Poirot, old chap," I began, "that was brilliantly done. The thread from the scarf, the footprint, it all fitted perfectly. But ... was there truly more to it?" In the room I thought perhaps another twist awaited. Poirot chuckled softly, a sound like the rustle of dry leaves. "Ah, Hastings, always the romantic. You seek the grand finale, the explosion of surprise. But life, it is not always so. Sometimes the truth is simple, though buried under layers of human folly." He paused under a lamppost, its glow casting elongated shadows, and fixed me with his penetrating gaze. "The Rendels, husband and wife, bound by love and crime. Dr. Rendel, with his debts and his access to poisons, saw in Mrs. Upward a solution. Her wealth, redirected through a forged will, could save him. But Mrs. McGinty, the humble cleaner, she saw too much the arsenic vial misplaced, the altered document. She did not blackmail, no, she was too fond of her gossip. But her hints, her knowing smiles, they threatened exposure." I nodded, recalling the details. "And Mrs. Rendel, to protect her husband, ... Precisement, love. It drives us to madness. She confronted Mrs. McGinty, the argument escalated, and the poker, the instrument of impulse, sealed the fate. The staged scene, the stopped clock, to mislead the time of death. The planted blood on Bentley's cuffet was clever, but not clever enough for Hercule Poirot." We resumed our walk, the village cottages dark and silent around us, as if Broadhinny itself held its breath. "But what of the others?" I pressed. "Eve Carpenter's false confession. Why did she do it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, the actress. She protected her own secret, fearing the scrutiny would unearth her past indiscretions. The child given up the scandal, but in confessing falsely she drew the fire away from the true guilty. Human nature, Hastings, it is predictable in its unpredictability. We shield those we love, even at our peril." As we approached Long Meadows, the cottage's windows aglow with lamplight, Poirot grew reflective, his voice taking on that philosophical tone I had come to cherish in our quieter moments. "You see, mon ami, crime is not merely an act of violence. It is a failure of the moral order. The little grey cells, they discern not only the how, but the why. In this case, greed and fear wove the web, but it was love misguided, desperate, love that tightened the noose. Mrs. Rendel killed not for gain, but for devotion. Dr. Rendel poisoned not solely for money, but to preserve his life, his marriage." I pondered this as we entered the sitting room, where a fire crackled invitingly in the grate. Poirot settled into his favorite armchair, gesturing for me to pour us each a tisane from the waiting pot. "And Bentley?" I asked, handing him the cup. "The poor fellow, arrested unjustly, released by now. I trust the evidence against him was circumstantial, planted to divert suspicion. A red herring, as you English say, though why a fish should be red, I do not comprehend." He sipped his tisane, sighing contentedly. "Order and method, Hastings. Without them, chaos reigns." I observed the suspects, their gestures, their lies, the contradictions in their alibis. The clock stopped at 8:47, yet the humming at 9 o'clock impossible, unless tampered with. The footprint, mismatched to Bentley's size. The green wool thread, unique to Mrs. Rendel's scarf, analyzed under my magnifying glass. Each clue, a thread, leading to the heart of the matter. I sat opposite him, the warmth of the fire easing the chill of the evening. "You've done it again, Poirot. The village owes you a debt." He waved a hand dismissively. "Nan and Hercule Poirot serves justice, not gratitude. But reflect, Hastings. In every village, every closed circle, secrets fester like wounds. Mrs. McGinty, with her prying eyes and wagging tongue, was the catalyst. Gossip, it is a double-edged sword, harmless amusement, or deadly weapon. In Broadhinny, it proved the latter." We fell silent for a time, the clock on the mantel ticking steadily, a reminder of the inexorable march of time. Poirot's words lingered, profound in their simplicity. He had unraveled the puzzle not through force or luck, but through the meticulous application of logic and an acute understanding of the human psyche. The Rendels' crimes, poison and bludgeon, stemmed from the same root, desperation born of hidden sins. At length, Poirot set down his cup. And now, mon ami, to bed. Tomorrow we return to London, the countryside. It is charming, but the air too full of mists and mysteries for prolonged exposure. I smiled, rising to retire. Good night, Poirot, you've outdone yourself. He bowed slightly from his chair, born Louis Hastings. Remember, the little grey cells, they never sleep. As I ascended the stairs, the events of the day replayed in my mind. The gathering at the vicarage, the accusations flying like arrows, the confessions wrung from reluctant lips. Poirot had orchestrated it all with the finesse of a maestro, exposing the rot beneath the village's polite facade. Broadhinny would heal, in time, its gossip subdued, its secrets buried with the dead. Yet as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling beams, a faint doubt niggled. Poirot had tied the knots so neatly, the arsenic, the will, the murder, but in his final glance, had there been a flicker of something unspoken? No, I chided myself. It was merely the fatigue of the day. Poirot's solutions were always complete, his philosophy unassailable. The next morning dawned bright, the mist burned away by a cheerful sun. Poirot was already packed, his valise neat by the door, when I descended. Over breakfast's poached eggs and toast, prepared by our landlady, he was his usual self, complaining mildly about the English bacon. Too fatty, Hastings, in Belgium. We know how to cure it properly. Inspector Grange arrived shortly after, his face gruff but respectful. Monsieur Poirot, the Rendles have confessed fully. Dr. Rendle admitted to the poisoning, said it was to ease Mrs. Upwood's suffering, but the forged will tells another tale. Mrs. Rendle, well, she's broken, but it'll hold in court. Poirot nodded. Excellent. Grange hesitated. One thing, though, Bentley, he's free, but he mentioned something odd. Said Mrs. McGinty had shown him a newspaper clipping about an old murder case. Thought it might be connected. Poirot's eyes sharpened momentarily. Then he smiled. A loose end, perhaps. But the case is closed. Au revoir, Inspector. As Grange departed, I turned to Poirot. What was that about a clipping? He shrugged elegantly. Nothing of import, mon ami. Mrs. McGinty collected such things, sensational stories, to fuel her gossip. It led nowhere. We departed Broadhinny by the midday train, the village receding behind us like a fading dream. Seated in our compartment, Poirot gazed out at the rolling fields, his expression serene. Life, Hastings, it is a series of puzzles. Solve one, and another awaits. But for now we rest, I agreed, though inwardly I wondered at his philosophy, the balance of order and chaos, the fragility of human bonds. Poirot had restored equilibrium to Broadhinny, but at what cost to the souls involved? Love, greed, fear, they danced eternally, waiting for the next misstep. As the train rattled on, Poirot dozed, his head nodding gently. I watched him, marveling once more at the mind within that compact frame. Hercule Poirot, the unparalleled detective, had triumphed again, his little grey cells victorious. And so, the case of Mrs. McGinty's death faded into memory, a testament to the enduring power of logic over deception. Chapter 12. The shadow of doubt. The train to London rattled through the countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the tumult of the past days in Broadhinny. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat opposite Poirot in our first-class compartment, the green fields and hedgerows blurring past the window. Poirot, ever immaculate, was engrossed in a small leather-bound notebook, jotting occasional observations with his precise, slanting script. His face, framed by those magnificent mustaches, was serene, but I knew better than to trust his outward calm. The case of Mrs. McGinty's murder had been solved, the Rendles arrested, and justice, as Poirot so often put it, restored to its proper balance. Yet, as I watched him, a faint unease gnawed at me, like a splinter lodged too deep to extract. The vicarage gathering had been a triumph of Poirot's methodologic psychology, and the relentless pursuit of truth had unraveled a web of deceit. It spun from greed and desperation. Dr. Rendle's poisoning of Mrs. Upwood, his falsified death certificate, and his wife's desperate act to silence Mrs. McGinty's gossip with a fatal blow, all had been laid bare. The clues: a stopped clock, the green wool thread, the mismatched footprint had aligned with Poirot's unerring precision. And yet, Inspector Grange's parting words about a newspaper clipping, mentioned by James Bentley, lingered in my mind like an unresolved chord. Poirot, I ventured, breaking the silence, that clipping Bentley mentioned, what do you make of it? Could it truly be nothing, as you said? Poirot closed his notebook with a deliberate snap and fixed me with his green cat-like eyes. Mon cher Hastings, he said, his voice tinged with that familiar blend of patience and amusement. You are like the hound who sniffs at every scent, even when the quarry is caught. The clipping, it is irrelevant, a distraction. Mrs. McGinty, she was a collector of tales, a hoarder of scandal. A newspaper story from years past, perhaps a lurid murder or a society disgrace, would be to her like a jewel to a magpie. It led nowhere. I frowned, unconvinced. But Bentley seemed to think it mattered. He said she showed it to him, as if it held some significance. Poirot waved a hand, dismissing the notion. Bentley, he is a nervous man, prone to seeing shadows where there are none. The case is closed. Hastings, the Rendles have confessed, Dr. Rendle to the poisoning, Madame Rendle to the murder of Mrs. McGinty. The evidence, it is conclusive. Why seek complications where none exist? His tone was firm, yet I detected a flicker in his expression, a momentary tightening of the lips, perhaps, or a shadow in his gaze. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by his usual air of serene confidence. I leaned back, chastising myself for doubting him. Poirot's solutions were always complete, his logic unassailable. Still, the clipping nagged at me, a loose thread in the otherwise flawless tapestry of his resolution. The train pulled into Paddington Station, and we disembarked into the bustle of London. Poirot, ever fastidious, adjusted his hat and brushed an imaginary speck from his coat before leading the way to a waiting taxi. As we settled into the cab, bound for his flat in Whitehaven Mansions, he turned to me with a smile. "You are pensive, Hastings. Tell me, what troubles the good captain?" I hesitated, then plunged in. "It's just ... Well, you've solved it all so neatly, Poirot. The Rendles, the motives, the clues, it fits. But what if there's more? What if Mrs. McGinty's gossip uncovered something else, something bigger? That clipping could point to another crime, another killer." Poirot's smile widened, though it held a touch of exasperation. "Always the imagination, mon ami. You weave stories like a novelist, not a detective. The clipping, if it exists, is but a footnote. Mrs. McGinty's death was no grand conspiracy, but a simple tragedy, greed, fear, and a fatal moment of impulse. Let us not chase phantoms." The taxi deposited us at Poirot's impeccably maintained flat, where his housekeeper, Miss Lemon, greeted us with her usual efficiency. "Welcome back, Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, taking up coats. "There's a letter from Inspector Grange on the desk, marked urgent." Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued, and crossed to the desk with his mincing step. He slit the envelope with a silver letter opener, his movements precise as a surgeon's, and scanned the contents. I watched, expecting a dismissive chuckle, but instead his brow furrowed, and he handed the letter to me without a word. It was brief, written in Grange's blunt utilitarian hand. "Monsieur Poirot, further to our conversation, Bentley has provided the clipping. It's from 1928, about the Lily Palmer case, a woman poisoned in Devon, case unsolved. Bentley swears Mrs. McGinty thought it connected to someone in Broadhinny. I'm skeptical, but thought you should know. The Rendles' confessions hold. No need to reopen. Regards, INSP. Grange." I looked up, my pulse quickening. "Poirot, this could be significant. The Lily Palmer case, poison unsolved. Could it tie to Mrs. Upwood's death, or someone else in the village?" Poirot took the letter back, his expression unreadable. "The Lily Palmer case," he murmured, as if tasting the words. "A curiosity, perhaps, but the Rendles' crimes are proven arsenic for Mrs. Upwood. The poker for Mrs. McGinty to pursue this clipping risks muddying the waters of justice. But what if it's not just a coincidence?" I pressed. "Mrs. McGinty was nosy. She might have seen a connection no one else did. What if someone in Broadhinny was involved in that old case?" Poirot sat, crossing one leg over the other, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. "Hastings, you tempt me to indulge in speculation, which is not the method of Hercule Poirot. But let us consider. The Lily Palmer case, poison, 1928. Devon, a woman, perhaps in her 30s, found dead in her cottage, arsenic in her tea. No suspect convicted, though a lover was suspected, a man who vanished. Mrs. McGinty, with her penchant for old scandals, might have seen a name, a face. That sparked recognition. But to what end? The Rendles' motives are clear: debt, inheritance, fear of exposure. To link this to an old crime is to build a house of cards." I leaned forward, undeterred. "But suppose someone else in the village major, perhaps, or even Deirdre Henderson, had a past tied to Lily Palmer. What if Mrs. McGinty recognized them from that clipping?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought I saw a spark of interest. "Possible," he conceded, "but improbable. The major, he was in India in 1928, his military records confirm it. Deirdre Henderson, a young girl then, hardly a master poisoner. The carpenters, too young or too transient. No, Hastings, the clipping is a distraction, a shadow cast by Mrs. McGinty's overactive imagination." He rose, pacing to the window, where the London dusk painted the sky in hues of grey and gold. "Yet," he added softly, almost to himself, "the little grey cells, they murmur. A detail overlooked, perhaps. It is nothing." He turned back to me, his tone brisk. "We shall file this clipping in the archives of curiosity, Hastings. The case is closed. Tomorrow, we dine at Simpson's, and we put Broadhinny behind us." I nodded, though my mind refused to settle. The clipping, the Lily Palmer case, it felt like a key to a lock I couldn't yet see. Poirot's confidence was unshakable, but I had learned, over our long friendship, that even he could miss a step, though he would never admit it. As we sat down to supper prepared by Miss Lemon with her usual precision, I resolved to keep my eyes open. Broadhinny's secrets, I suspected, might not be entirely laid to rest. That night, as I lay in the guest room of Poirot's flat, the image of Mrs. McGinty's cluttered parlor returned to her collection of gossip, her scribbled notes, that fatal poker, and the clipping, a ghost from 1928, whispering of poison and unfinished business. Poirot might dismiss it, but I could not. Somewhere in the quiet corners of Broadhinny, another truth might yet stir, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Chapter 13. The whisper of the past. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Poirot's Whitehaven mansion's flat, casting delicate patterns on the polished floor. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat at the breakfast table, stirring my tea absently, my thoughts still tethered to the events in Broadhinny and that enigmatic newspaper clipping about the Lily Palmer case. Poirot, seated opposite, was as pristine as ever, his egg boiled to precisely 3 minutes, his toast cut into neat triangles. He sipped his chocolate with an air of contentment, but I sensed a subtle tension in his posture, as if his little grey cells were not entirely at rest. The Rendell's confessions had closed the case of Mrs. McGinty's murder, and Dr. Roland Mrs. Upwood's poisoning had been laid bare with Poirot's characteristic precision. The green wool thread, the stopped clock, the footprint in the garden, all had pointed unerringly to Laura Rendell's desperate act to protect her husband's crimes. Yet the clipping, that tantalizing echo of a 1928 poisoning in Devon, refused to fade from my mind. Inspector Granger's letter, delivered yesterday, had stirred a restless curiosity in me, and I could not help but wonder if Poirot, despite his dismissal, felt its pull as well. Poirot, I began, setting down my spoon. I know you said the Lily Palmer clipping was irrelevant, but it keeps nagging at me. Mrs. McGinty wasn't the sort to keep meaningless scraps. What if she saw something in Broadhinny that tied to that old case? Couldn't we at least look into it? Poirot's eyes flicked up from his chocolate, a faint smile playing beneath his moustaches. Monsieur Hastings, your persistence is admirable. If somewhat exhausting, the case, it is closed. The Rendells are in custody, their motives clear, their confessions corroborated. To chase this clipping is to pursue a the whisper charming but futile endeavor. But what if it's not futile? I pressed. What if someone in the village, someone we overlooked, had a connection to Lily Palmer? You said yourself, her murder was unsolved, a lover suspected but never found. Couldn't that lover be hiding in Broadhinny? Poirot set down his cup with a delicate clink and leaned back, his fingers steepled. You weave a tale, Hastings, full of drama and intrigue. Very well. Let us indulge your imagination for a moment. The Lily Palmer case, a woman poisoned in her Devon cottage, 1928. Arsenic. As with Mrs. Upwood, the suspect, a man, her lover, perhaps vanished without trace. Mrs. McGinty, with her magpie mind, finds a clipping and believes it relevant. To whom the Rendells and their crimes are accounted for. The Carpenters too young, their secrets elsewhere. Major Summerhays in India at the time. Deirdre Henderson, a child in 1928. Who, then, remains? Hesitated, my mind racing through the village's cast. What about someone peripheral? The vicar, Mr. Hargreaves, or even Mrs. Elliot, the neighbor who heard the humming? Poirot chuckled, a low melodic sound. The vicar, a poisoner, mon ami, you stretch credulity, and Mrs. Elliot, a gossip like Mrs. McGinty, but no murderer. No, the clipping is a distraction, a relic of Mrs. McGinty's obsession with scandal. Yet he paused, his eyes narrowing, and I caught a glint of something, doubt perhaps, or curiosity. The little grey cells, they whisper, as they did last night. A detail perhaps overlooked. Before I could press further, Miss Lemon entered, her usual efficiency tempered by a rare hesitancy. Monsieur Poirot, a telegram has just arrived. From Broadhinny. She handed him a slip of paper, her lips pursed. Poirot read it swiftly, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to intense focus. He passed it to me without comment. The telegram, from Inspector Grange, was terse. M. Poirot, Bentley found another item in McGinty's belongings. A letter, unsigned, dated 1928, mentioning Lily Palmer and a promise kept, found hidden in her Bible. Thought it worth mentioning. Rendell still confessing. No change to case. Grange, my heart quickened. Poirot, this changes everything. A letter from 1928, tied to Lily Palmer, hidden in her Bible. That's no coincidence. Poirot rose, pacing to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Nan, it is not a coincidence. But what does it mean? A promise kept, vague yet suggestive. Mrs. McGinty, she kept this letter close, hidden even from her own prying nature. Why? Because it was dangerous? Or because it pointed to someone she knew? He turned, his eyes alight with that familiar spark of intellectual pursuit. Hastings, you have stirred the pot, and now the broth simmers. We must return to Broad. This letter, it is a thread, perhaps the final one in our tapestry. By noon, we were on a train back to the village, the countryside once again unfolding beyond the windows. Poirot was silent for much of the journey, his notebook open, his pencil sketching diagrams, timelines, names, connections. I watched, marveling at his mind's relentless order. What do you think the letter means? I asked at length. Poirot tapped his pencil against the page. A promise kept in 1928. Lily Palmer died, poisoned. A lover was suspected but never found. This letter, it suggests someone in Broadhinny knew of that promise, perhaps fulfilled it with poison. Mrs. McGinty, cleaning houses, overhearing whispers, found this letter, perhaps in the Upwood household or another. She recognized a name, a face. She kept it, not for blackmail, but for curiosity, until it led to her death. But the Rendles confessed, I said, puzzled. Could the letter point to someone else? Possibly, Poirot admitted, or it confirms Dr. Rendle's guilt beyond Mrs. Upwood. Suppose he was in Devon in 1928, before Broadhinny. His medical practice had moved often in those years. A young doctor, debts mounting, a patient like Lily Palmer perhaps, a lover, perhaps a victim of opportunity. We arrived in Broadhinny by late afternoon, the village green bathed in golden light, belying the dark currents beneath. Inspector Grange met us at the station, his face a mixture of resignation and curiosity. "Didn't expect you back so soon, Monsieur Poirot," he said, handing over a sealed envelope. "Here's the letter. Bentley found it this morning, tucked in the Book of Psalms." Poirot opened the envelope with care, extracting a brittle yellowed sheet. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, but unsigned. "My dear, the promise is kept. Lily is gone, as we planned. No one suspects. Come to me soon, and we shall be free." The 12th of April 1928. Poirot's lips tightened. "A woman's hand," he murmured. Not Dr. Rendle then, but perhaps his accomplice before, Laura Rendle, or another entirely. We proceeded to the police station, where Grange had arranged for Bentley to meet us. The former lodger was pale, his eyes darting nervously. "I found it by chance," he stammered. "Mrs. McGinty showed me the clipping once. Said it reminded her of someone in the village. Then, today, I was clearing out her things helping the vicar. You see, and the letter fell out." Poirot's questions were gentle but probing. "This clipping, Monsieur Bentley, what did she say of it?" Bentley swallowed. "She said it was like looking at a ghost. She wouldn't say who, but she kept staring at it, muttering about promises and secrets." Poirot dismissed Bentley with thanks and turned to me, his expression grave. "Hastings, the letter and clipping, they point to a shadow in Broadhinny's past. The Rendles' crimes, they are real, but this suggests a deeper root. We must revisit the suspects subtly. The writer of this letter or its recipient may still walk among us." That evening, we dined at the guest house, where Major and Maureen Summerhays played uneasy hosts. Deirdre Henderson was there, quietly, sipping soup, her eyes guarded. The Carpenters were absent, away in London, but Poirot's gaze lingered on the remaining faces. "Tomorrow," he whispered to me, "we probe. The letter, it is the key. Someone in Broadhinny knows of Lily Palmer, and Mrs. McGinty paid the price for their secret." As we retired to our rooms, the village silent under a starlit sky, I felt the weight of an unseen truth pressing closer. Poirot's little grey cells were stirring, and I knew, with a thrill of anticipation, that the final act of this mystery was yet to unfold. Chapter 14. The final thread. The morning in Broadhinny dawned with a deceptive calm, the village green shimmering under a veil of dew, as if the secrets it harbored could be washed away by the light of day. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, stood at the window of our lodgings at Long Meadows, watching the village awaken, my mind awhirl with the implications of the mysterious letter found in Mrs. McGinty's Bible. That fragile, yellowed note and penned in a feminine hand, speaking of a promise kept and the death of Lily Palmer, in 1928 had cast a shadow over the neat resolution of the Rendles' crimes. Poirot, ever the master of order, had agreed to return to Broadhinny to probe this new thread, and I sensed that today would bring the final unraveling of the mystery. Poirot was already seated at the breakfast table when I joined him, his appearance as impeccable as ever, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his mustaches waxed to perfection. He was studying the letter again, holding it to the light as if it might yield its secrets under scrutiny. "Hastings," he said without looking up, "today we tighten the net. This letter, it is not merely a relic of the past, it is a beacon, pointing to a truth that connects the death of Lily Palmer to the tragedies of Broadhinny. We must proceed with care, for the guilty one is cunning and will not yield eyes." "Silly," I nodded, pouring myself a cup of tea. "Do you think the letter points to someone we've overlooked? The Rendles' confessions seem so complete. Dr. Rendle's poisoning of Mrs. Upwood, Laura's murder of Mrs. McGinty. Could this be an older crime, linked to one of the others in the village?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of intellectual fire. "Precisement, mon ami. The Rendles, they are guilty. But this letter suggests a deeper history, a crime that set the stage for all that followed. The Lily Palmer Kaiser cynic, a lover who vanished, a promise kept. Mrs. McGinty, with her prying ways, stumbled upon this letter, perhaps in the Upwood household, and recognized its significance. She did not blackmail Nan, but her curiosity was her undoing. We must find the writer or the recipient." After breakfast, we set out to revisit the key figures in the case. Poirot's plan, as meticulous as a chess master's gambit. Our first stop was the vicarage, where the Reverend Mr. Hargreaves greeted us with nervous hospitality. His study, lined with theological tomes, seemed an unlikely setting for intrigue, but Poirot's questions were sharp and direct. "Monsieur le Reverend, Mrs. McGinty cleaned here, did she not? Did she ever speak of old scandals, perhaps a newspaper clipping or a letter from years past?" Hargreaves blinked, his hands fidgeting with a prayer book. "Mrs. McGinty was a talkative sort, always chattering about this or that. I recall her mentioning a clipping once, something about a murder in Devon. Years ago, she seemed excited, but I paid little mind. Gossipy no is not my concern. Poirot's gaze was piercing. A letter, perhaps hidden in a book, or found among papers. The vicar shook his head. Nothing like that. My wife handles the household papers. She might know more. Mrs. Hargreaves, a quiet woman with a pinched face, was summoned. She admitted to finding Mrs. McGinty rummaging through old correspondence in the study once, but claimed no knowledge of a specific letter. Poirot thanked them politely, but as we left, he murmured, "The vicar is honest, but his wife hesitates, a small thing, but noted." Next, we visited Deirdre Henderson at the Upwood cottage, a rambling house filled with the late playwright's manuscripts and theatrical mementos. Deirdre, pale and composed, received us in the parlor, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot wasted no time. "Mademoiselle, your aunt's death poisoned as we now know, by Dr. Rendell. Mrs. McGinty, cleaning here, found something, a letter, perhaps hidden in a book or desk, a letter from 1928, mentioning Lily Palmer." Deirdre's eyes flickered, but her voice remained steady. "I know nothing of such a letter. Mrs. McGinty was always poking about, but my aunt's papers were mostly plays, not secrets." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but relentless. "And yet, mademoiselle, your aunt's play, The Gossamer Web, spoke of a poisoner, a woman who killed for love and freedom. A coincidence? Or did Mrs. McGinty find a truth that mirrored the fiction?" Deirdre's composure cracked, her hands trembling. "I told you, I loved my aunt. I had no part in her death." Poirot nodded, rising. "Mercy. Mademoiselle, we shall see." Our final stop was the Summerhays guest house, where Major and Maureen Summerhays were tidying the breakfast room. Maureen's laughter was strained, and the Major's military brusqueness seemed forced. Poirot, with his usual tact, engaged them in small talk before slipping in the question. "Madame Summerhays, you were young in 1928. Did you ever hear of a case in Devon, the death of Lily Palmer?" Maureen's hand froze on a teacup. "Lily Palmer? I don't think so. I was in London then, barely out of school." The Major coughed. "Old scandals don't interest us, Poirot. Why dig up the past?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Because, Major, the past sometimes refuses to stay buried." As we left, Poirot's pace quickened, his eyes alight. "Hastings." The thread tightens. "Maureen Summerhays," she hesitated, her hand shook. "The letter, it was written by a woman, and I begin to see the pattern." Back at Long Meadows, Poirot spread his notes on the table, the letter and clipping at the center. "Let us reconstruct," he said, his voice low and intense. "In 1928, Lily Palmer is poisoned in Devon. A lover is suspected but vanishes. The letter speaks of a promise kept, written by a woman to her accomplice, perhaps the lover. Years later, Mrs. McGinty finds this letter, perhaps in Mrs. Upwood's study, where old papers lingered. She recognizes a name, a face. She hints, she probes, and it costs her life." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "But who Not the Rendells. They weren't in Devon then. Deirdre was too young." "The Carpenters, none," Poirot said sharply. "Maureen Summerhays, she was in London in 1928. "Yes, but London is not so far from Devon." And her reaction, her fear, when I mentioned Lily Palmer, the letter's handwriting, "It is elegant, like hers." Suppose, Hastings, that Maureen, young and desperate, was involved with a man, the lover who poisoned Lily Palmer. The promise kept was her urging, her plan. Mrs. McGinty, cleaning, at the guest house, found the letter, perhaps kept from Mrs. Upwood's collection. She recognized Maureen's youth, her past. I gasped. "But Maureen, she's so lively, so open, precise, the perfect mask." "She did not kill Mrs. McGinty. Laura Rendell did that to protect her husband's crime. But more secret, the Lily Palmer murder, was what Mrs. McGinty uncovered." She hinted, perhaps playfully, and it set the Rendells' panic in motion. That evening, Poirot arranged a final gathering at the guest house, summoning only Maureen She arrived, her brightness dimmed, her eyes wary. Poirot held up the letter. "Madame, this is yours, written in 1928. You urged a man to poison Lily Palmer, a rival perhaps, or an obstacle to your freedom. Mrs. McGinty found it, and though she did not blackmail, her gossip threatened you." Maureen collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "It was so long ago. I was young, in love with a man who promised me everything. Lily was his wife. She wouldn't let him go. I wrote that letter, but I didn't kill her. He did, and he left me." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "And Mrs. McGinty's hints drove you to fear exposure. You told the Rendells, perhaps, to sparking their own desperation." Maureen nodded, broken. "I didn't mean for anyone to die." Poirot turned to Inspector Grange, who had joined us. "Madame Summerhays is not a murderer in this case, but her past must be investigated. The Lily Palmer case, it reopens." As Maureen was led away for questioning, I marveled at Poirot's genius. The letter, the clipping, small things, but they had unraveled a crime buried for decades, linking past and present in a deadly chain. Chapter 15. The Restoration of Order. The twilight settled over Broadhinny like a soft veil, the village's stone cottages glowing faintly under the last rays of the sun. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, stood outside the guest house, my breath visible, in the cool evening air, my mind still reeling from the revelations of the day. Hercule Poirot's relentless pursuit of truth had unraveled not only the murders of Mrs. McGinty and Mrs. Upwood, but also a long-buried secret tied to the 1928 poisoning of Lily Palmer. Maureen Summerhayes' tearful admission, her role in urging a lover to kill Lily, documented in that fateful letter, had cast a new light on the village's tangled web of deceit. Yet, as Poirot and I prepared to depart Broadhinny for the final time, I sensed his work was not quite done. Inside the guest-house parlor, Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his small frame commanding the room as surely as a general on a battlefield. Inspector Grange stood by the door, his burly form softened by a weary respect for Poirot's genius. Major Summerhayes, his face ashen, sat beside his wife Maureen, who clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red from weeping. The other suspects, Henderson, the Carpenters, and the Hargreaves, had been spared this final gathering, their roles in the drama peripheral but not forgotten. The air was heavy with the weight of truths laid bare, and I, notebook in hand, waited for Poirot to weave the final threads of this intricate tapestry. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, "we stand at the end of a most tragic affair. The death of Mrs. McGinty, struck down in her parlor, was but the surface of a deeper Malaysia chain of sins stretching back to 1928. Hercule Poirot has promised order, and order shall be restored. Let us recount the truth, step by step, so that no shadow remains." He rose, pacing with his characteristic precision, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. First, the crime of Mrs. Upwood, poisoned with arsenic by Dr. John Rendell. His motive, greed, masked as necessity. Debts pressed upon him, and the altered will of Mrs. Upwood promised salvation. Mrs. McGinty, the charwoman cleaning the Upwood household, stumbled upon evidence, perhaps a forged document. She did not blackmail Nan, but her hints, her gossip, alarmed Dr. Rendell, his wife Laura Rendell, to protect him, struck Mrs. McGinty with a poker, staging the scene with a stopped clock, and planted blood to mislead. These crimes, they are confessed, their guilt certain. Inspector Grange nodded, his pipe unlit in his hand. "The Rendells are in custody, Monsieur Poirot, their confessions hold. But this business with Mrs. Summerhayes, where does it fit?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, turning to Maureen, who shrank under his gaze. "Madame Summerhayes, your secret is the root of this tragedy. In 1928 in Devon, Lily Palmer was poisoned arsenic. Like Mrs. Upwood, a lover was suspected, a man who vanished. But you, madame, wrote the letter we found in Mrs. McGinty's Bible. The promise is kept. Lily is gone, as we planned. You urged this man, your lover, perhaps to kill his wife, Lily, for freedom, for love. You did not wield the poison, but your words, they set the stage." Maureen's voice was barely a whisper. "I was young, foolish. I loved him. Lily was cruel, holding him in a loveless marriage. I wrote that letter, but I didn't know he'd go through with it. He left me after, disappeared. I came to Broadhinny to start anew." Major Summerhayes gripped her hand, his face torn between loyalty and shock. "Maureen, why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't," she sobbed. "It was buried, until Mrs. McGinty found that letter. She cleaned here, found it among old papers I'd kept from my aunt's estate. She must have taken it. She hinted, smiled, as if she knew. I was terrified it would come out." Poirot nodded gravely. "And so, the chain links, Mrs. McGinty, with her clipping of the Lily Palmer case and your letter, saw a ghost from the past. She did not blackmail, but her curiosity stirred fear. You, Madame Summerhayes, confided your terror to Laura Rendell, perhaps in a moment of weakness. Laura, already protecting her husband's crime, saw Mrs. McGinty as a threat to you both. She acted, not for you, but to silence a gossip who knew too much of Broadhinny's secrets." I scribbled furiously, piecing together the connections. "So Maureen's past sparked the Rendell's actions." "Precisement, Hastings," Poirot said, turning to me. "The letter, hidden in the Bible, was the spark. Mrs. McGinty, with her magpie mind, collected it, perhaps from Mrs. Upwood's papers, where it had been mislaid years before. Her hints to Maureen, her murmurs about old scandals, set off a chain of panic. Laura Rendell, fearing exposure of her husband's poisoning, struck first. The green wool thread, the footprint, the stopped clock, these were her attempts to cover her tracks. But the letter, it pointed to a deeper truth." Inspector Grange cleared his throat. "So Mrs. Summerhayes isn't guilty of McGinty's murder, but the Palmer case?" Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, Inspector. Madame Summerhayes must answer for her role in 1928 conspiracy, perhaps, though the statute of limitations may apply. The police in Devon must investigate. But for Mrs. McGinty's death, the Rendells alone bear the guilt." Maureen buried her face in her hands, her husband's arm around her. "I never meant for any of this." Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "Madame, the past, it is a shadow that follows us. You sought to bury it, but truth, it has a way of rising. Mrs. McGinty's death, it was the price of secrets kept too long." He turned to the room, his gaze encompassing us all. "This case, it teaches us the peril of the hidden heart. Gossip, love, greed, these are the threads that wove this tragedy. Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, has untangled them, not with force, but with logic, with observation, with the understanding of human nature. Order is restored, but let us reflect, the smallest word, the smallest act, can ripple through time, bringing destruction. Grange stepped forward. I'll see to Mrs. Summerhay's statement, Monsieur Poirot. The Devon police will take it from here. Poirot bowed slightly. Merci, Inspector. My work here is done. As we left the guest house, the village now cloaked in darkness, I walked beside Poirot, my heart heavy with the weight of human frailty. You did it again, Poirot, I said quietly. You saw what no one else could, the letter, the past, the connections. He smiled, a touch of melancholy in his eyes. Hastings, the little grey cells, they see what is hidden, but they cannot heal the wounds of the heart. Maureen Summerhays, she will carry her guilt, as will the Retnulls. Broadhinny will heal, but its scars remain. We boarded the train. To London the next morning, the village receding into the mist. Poirot gazed out the window, his face serene but thoughtful. Life, mon ami, it is a puzzle, always shifting. We solve one piece, and another awaits. But for now, we return to order, to London, to peace. I nodded, my notebook tucked away. The case of Mrs. McGinty's death, a closed chapter. Yet, as the train carried us away, I couldn't help but wonder at the power of a single letter, a whispered promise from decades past, to unravel lives in the present. Poirot's genius had prevailed, but the echoes of Broadhinny's secrets would linger, a reminder that even in the quietest villages, the past never truly sleeps.